Chapter 25-32, Black Dragons. Might everyone instinctively refuse to believe that a dragon had appeared before them. In God's domain, dragons were synonymous with destruction. They could easily destroy entire kingdoms and empires. Any location that had a dragon appear there would automatically be viewed as a forbidden land for players. Demon players were no exception to this rule. Only death awaited them if they came across a dragon. Hence, how could a player possibly summon a dragon? However, the powerful aura and pressure, which stemmed from a massive difference in life rating, the black dragon gave off was undoubtedly real. At this moment, aside from the demon players present, Blue Frost and the others standing behind Sherfong were likewise astonished by this situation. They never thought that their guild leader would possess such a trump card. No. Something's not right. That dragon seems to be only at Tier 3. It's not a Tier 5 adult dragon. A Tier 3 demon ranger, who had used an identification skill on the black dragon, suddenly shouted. Upon hearing this ranger's announcement, everyone immediately reacted to the situation. It really is a Tier 3 dragon. I knew it. I knew it was impossible for a player to summon an adult dragon. Even so, that black flame is still plenty amazing. I'm afraid even the vice commander will be helpless against a Tier 3 dragon. When Demon's Heart's members saw that the black dragon was merely a level 111, Tier 3 infant dragon, they breathed out a sigh of relief. As far as they knew, most dragons that appeared before players were Tier 5 adult dragons, and even the weakest among them were Tier 4 infant dragons. They were not existences that current players could hope to go up against. However, a Tier 3 infant dragon was a different story. The reason why dragons were considered the apex race in God's domain and possessed overwhelming strength was their incredibly high life rating and growth potential. They gained much more basic attributes than any other race from each level up. Every increase in their tier would also grant them a qualitative transformation. Hence, after reaching Tier 5 and becoming an adult, a dragon would possess the strength to devastate countries. A Tier 3 dragon, on the other hand, might still be invincible among those of the same tier, but it posed a much lesser threat than dragons at Tier 4 or above. It's no wonder why you dare provoke Demon's Heart, Rebellious Thunder said as he looked at the black dragon looming above him. Currently he, too, was feeling intense pressure from the dragon. However, instead of despair rising, Rebellious Thunder's fighting spirit flared. He leaped toward the black dragon, shouting, "However, don't even think that a Tier 3 dragon is enough to force Demon's Heart to step back." Dragons indeed possessed a strength that made them unrivaled among those of the same tier. However, a demon count, like himself, also possessed such strength. Moreover, he was currently wielding Cruel Darkness, one of the demon race's 16 magic weapons. If he combined that with his techniques, he was confident he could fight even a Tier 3 dragon. In the next moment, Rebellious Thunder raised Cruel Darkness and executed a slash at the black dragon, with Power of Darkness wrapped around the greatsword. Space split apart wherever the greatsword passed. Tier 3 skill, Blazing Slash. What a powerful move. You can definitely send a mythic monster flying with this move, Sherfong said in admiration as he looked at the pitch-black greatsword descending toward the black dragon. Unfortunately, you made a basic mistake. What you're going up against isn't an ordinary Tier 3 dragon, but a Tier 3 dragon that I am controlling. After Sherfong said so, his doppelganger took action, sending a claw swinging at the descending greatsword. Secret technique, Lightning Flash. The gigantic claw transformed into streaks of light that clashed with the pitch-black sword. Accompanied by the sound of an explosion, the pitch-black sword shattered, the frightening recoil sending Rebellious Thunder flying back like a cannonball. In the blink of an eye, Rebellious Thunder's body crashed into Demon City's curtain wall, his HP instantly decreasing by more than 300,000. How is that possible? How can a summoned creature use a combat technique? For a time, everyone stared at the black dragon's proud figure in shock and confusion. In fact, the shock they felt right now was even greater than what they felt previously, when they thought Sherfong had summoned a Tier 4 or Tier 5 dragon. In God's domain, although players could summon and control powerful creatures to fight for them, after all was said and done, they weren't controlling their own bodies. Hence, They could only conduct subpar battles with their summoned creatures. Executing combat techniques that required nimble and precise movements from the physical body using a summoned creature would be beyond them. Now, however, not only did Sherfeng execute a combat technique through the black dragon he summoned, but the complexity of the combat technique he executed was also extremely high. For a moment, everyone felt as if the system was playing a joke on them. What no one knew was that Sherfeng had already reached the realms of Truth's Ascension realm. The control he possessed over his physical body had long since surpassed the standard of ordinary people. Although it was extremely difficult to execute Lightning Flash through the Black Dragon, he could, although just barely. However, the power of the technique was far inferior to when he executed the technique with his own body. Even so, combined with the power of the Black Dragon, it wasn't an attack Rebellious Thunder could block. Meanwhile, after landing a successful blow, Sherfeng did not give Rebellious Thunder any opportunity to recollect himself. The Black Dragon immediately opened its maw at Rebellious Thunder. Dragon Breath. In the next moment, a dazzling beam of light devoured Rebellious Thunder, who was embedded in Demon City's wall, and brightly illuminated the area before Demon City's main entrance. The frightening shockwave of the attack vaporized all Demon's Heart members standing in the vicinity of the beam and shook the entire Demon City slightly. In fact, cracks even appeared on the city's sturdy walls. Silence. Destruction. For a time, shock and fear filled everyone present, particularly the Demon's Heart members who just barely survived the shockwave of the dragon breath. They could not help but goggle in stunned silence at the steaming canyon that had formed beside them. So, this is a dragon? Regretful Wind and the others who were spectating the fight from inside Demon City shuddered at this outcome. After all, the Black Dragon was simply too strong. With just one attack, the Black Dragon had instantly vaporized Rebellious Thunder, who was a demon count. The only thing left in Rebellious Thunder's place was a pitch-black blade. Earlier, despite suffering from the Black Dragon's combat technique, Rebellious Thunder still had over 5 million HP remaining. Even if Rebellious Thunder simply stood in place without defending himself, a Tier 4 mythic monster would still need quite some time to kill him. However, Sherfeng's Black Dragon had used only one attack to turn Rebellious Thunder into nothing. Run! When the Demon's Heart members snapped out of their daze, their originally calm and arrogant composure instantly crumbled, and they fled frantically toward Demon City. What a joke! Aside from Rebellious Thunder, everyone else in the team was only a Demon Viscount or Demon Baron. Since the Black Dragon could kill Rebellious Thunder with one hit, it could naturally do the same to them. In fact, the Black Dragon might only need a single claw swipe to finish off the rest of them. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Upon seeing this scene, the spectating demon players were stupefied. Were these fleeing players really the same Demon's Heart experts they knew of? Normally, every one of Demon's Heart's members was an arrogant prick. They behaved as if they were entirely different creatures from other players. Even the members of Demon City's top 3 adventurer teams were afraid of Demon's Heart's experts. Now, however, these same experts from Demon's Heart were actually fleeing from Sherfeng like mice that had just come across a cat. This was definitely the first time such a situation had happened since Demon City's construction. Even when going up against Battle Wolves, Demon's Heart's experts had not retreated even an inch. Meanwhile, the shocking news of Rebellious Thunder's death and Demon's Heart's members' frantic retreat also quickly spread throughout Demon City. Chapter 25-33, Siege? Demon City, Demon's Heart's residence. Rebellious Thunder died? How is that possible? Standing inside the Darkness training room, Furious Heart was stunned when he heard his subordinates report. What happened? Previously, in order to frighten off Sherfeng's team, he had specifically approved the decision to send Rebellious Thunder to meet with Sherfeng to warn the swordsman to leave Demon City and offer the possibility of a future partnership between their two guilds. Now, however, he had received news that not only had Sherfeng refused their kind offer, but Rebellious Thunder had also died. There must be some kind of miscommunication. Rebellious Thunder is a demon count. With his strength, let alone Zero Wings experts, he wouldn't have any problems going up against even the 5 great super guilds' old monsters. Moreover, he was standing before Demon City's entrance. He should have still had the buff from the city's magic array. How could he possibly have been killed? The black-clad elder, who was a Tier 3 demon viscount, exclaimed in astonishment. Rebellious Thunder was one of Demon's Heart's strongest experts. While inside Demon City, he could fight even Tier 4 NPCs. It was also due to Rebellious Thunder's presence that the guild leader and vice-guild leader had left on a distant expedition without worrying about Demon City's affairs. Now, however, he was being told that Rebellious Thunder had died. How could he possibly believe this? News of this matter has already spread throughout the city. Moreover, the fight was recorded by many players. The Tier 3 assassin who had come to report on this matter said with a bitter smile as he faced Furious Heart and the other guild elders present. Previously, he had also denied the validity of this information when he received the report of his subordinate. However, after watching the battle videos going viral on the official forums, he had no choice but to believe it. He then shared one of the better videos recorded with the guild elders present. In the video, a 30-meter-tall black dragon could be seen sending the demonized Rebellious Thunder flying with a combat technique. Immediately afterward, the black dragon vaporized Rebellious Thunder and created a small canyon before Demon City using its dragon breath. When the video ended, silence fell over the entire training room. So, this thing was the cause of the previous shaking? Furious Heart's complexion turned grim as he gazed at the black dragon in the video. A dragon? Although the black dragon was only a Tier 3 infant dragon, it possessed astonishing strength. If the black dragon could kill even a monster like Rebellious Thunder in a single hit, aside from the guild leader and vice-guild leader Flaming Light, nobody in Demon's Heart posed a threat to it. Elder Heart, what should we do? If Black Flame is capable of killing even Vice Commander Thunder, I'm afraid he can kill me easily once he enters the city, Troubled Times said worriedly after witnessing the black dragon's strength. Troubled Times never dreamed that Sherfong would have such a frightening trump card saved up. He had clearly fled to a demon territory already. Non-demon players couldn't use any berserk skills here. However, Sherfong actually had the ability to transform his doppelganger into a dragon. For a moment, Troubled Times had a feeling that the main god system was playing a joke on him. Commander Troubled, you don't have to worry too much. Black Flame's trump card might be powerful, but the duration in which his doppelganger can remain in dragon form should be very limited. The transformation will last for a few minutes, at most, Furious Heart said calmly. Moreover, he can only strut around outside Demon City. Without our invitation, he shouldn't even think of entering. All you need to do is rest inside our residence and wait until the tracking mark on you disappears. That's right. He is merely a human player. Even if he can summon a dragon, it is merely a Tier 3 dragon. It might be strong against players like us, but it is far from sufficient for dealing with the demon NPCs inside the city. Not to mention, Demon City still has a defensive magic array. Non-demon players without an invitation can't enter the city. You can relax and rest here, the black-clad demon Viscount Elder said, nodding in agreement with Furious Heart's words. Once the guild leader and vice-guild leader return, Black Flame is doomed. Rebellious Thunder's death was indeed surprising. The fact that Sherfong could summon a dragon was even more shocking. However, this was only at the standard of players. Before the NPCs of God's domain, these things were nothing. Not to mention, they were currently standing inside Demon City. Demon City was far more powerful than the NPC cities found in the outside world. It had not only an army of demon NPCs defending it but also the protection of one of the demon race's 72 great demon marquises. Let alone Zero Wing, even if all of the Ten Saints Empire's superpowers joined hands, they still wouldn't be capable of taking down Demon City. All Sherfang's team could do was act arrogantly outside Demon City. Once Demon's Heart's main force returned, Sherfang's team would have nowhere to run. That's a dragon we're talking about. Can Demon City's defensive magic array really stop it? Troubled Times could not help asking worriedly. He wasn't doubting Furious Heart. It was just that Sherfong was far too frightening. After all, the swordsman had survived an attack from a demon king's hand. Troubled Times truly could not bring himself to relax in this situation. This is Demon City. A Tier 4 dragon might be a different story, but a Tier 3 dragon can, at most, roar at the city. "We don't need to pay Black Flame any mind," Furious Heart assured him confidently. The other Demon's Heart members present rolled their eyes at Troubled Times' anxious behavior. The reason why demon players like themselves could establish themselves in the Ten Saints Empire was precisely the helplessness of the Empire's various superpowers against Demon City. Those superpowers could only watch from the sidelines as the city developed rapidly. Anyone who said that Sherfong could break through the city's defenses all by himself would be joking. While Troubled Times and Demon's Heart's elders were discussing this matter, the players residing in Demon City had gone into an uproar. Amazing! The Black Dragon actually managed to instant-kill Rebellious Thunder under Demon City's protection. This is the first time Demon's Heart suffered such a loss since Demon City's construction. It's no wonder Demon's Heart offered such an astronomical bounty before. Zero Wing really isn't a force to be trifled with. Even the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers are helpless against Demon's Heart. Just what kind of guild is Zero Wing? Due to Rebellious Thunder's death, the players inside Demon City grew interested in Zero Wing. Many adventurer teams had even started looking into Zero Wing in order to find out what kind of guild it was. As Demon City's resident players were making a fuss over this matter, Sherfong manipulated the Black Dragon and had it fly above Demon City and hover above Demon's Heart's residents. This situation created another stir among Demon City's resident players. What is he trying to do? He's not trying to break into the city, right? This is Demon City. How can players possibly enter it by force? He's probably trying to scare us. The players inside Demon's Heart's residence also quickly took notice of the 30-meter-tall Black Dragon. For a time, everyone there discussed the Black Dragon, wondering what Sherfong was trying to do. Elder Heart, the defensive magic array shouldn't have a problem stopping the dragon, right? Troubled Times could not help asking as he eyed the Black Dragon in the sky. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You relax. If it's only capable of executing attacks like the one before, Black Flame shouldn't even think of getting into the city, even if he attacks for an hour continuously, Furious Heart replied. Turning to look at the Black Dragon in the sky, he continued in a disdainful tone. Vice Guild Leader Light has already received the news about Black Flame. He'll be returning with his team very soon. Black Flame can only act arrogantly for now. However, as soon as Furious Heart finished speaking, Sherfang's voice suddenly came from above the city. Troubled Times, don't think that Demon City can protect you. In the next moment, a frightening amount of mana started gathering before the Black Dragon, the area within a 300-yard radius of the Black Dragon getting depleted of mana. First Sword, Light Shadow. Chapter 25-34, Frightened Demons. What? He's really going to siege the city? This is Demon City we're talking about. Is he insane? When the resident players of Demon City heard Sherfang's words, they were stunned. They never thought that Sherfong actually intended to attack Demon City directly. This revelation was as if someone had just told them that there were players seeking to attack the capital city of an NPC kingdom. This had to be a joke. In the next moment, however, the Black Dragon ruthlessly smashed its claw into the magic barrier protecting the city. The instant the claw started descending, it transformed into a gigantic phantom claw that blotted out the sky. Boom! The sky thundered and the earth shook when the phantom claw collided with the translucent barrier. The intense shockwaves even shattered the surrounding space like glass. The power of this claw attack was many times greater than that of the dragon breath the Black Dragon used before. What power? Regretful Wind, who had just exited the bar he visited, was shocked as he looked at the trembling magic barrier above him. Demon City's defensive magic array doesn't react so violently even when a Tier 4 NPC goes all out. Just how strong is that Black Dragon's attack? There was nobody in Demon City that did not know how strong Demon City's defensive magic array was. When Demon City was first constructed, the Ten Saints Empire had once dispatched an NPC army to attack it. Back then, however, even when multiple Tier 4 NPCs bombarded the city's defensive magic array with everything they had, the magic array didn't vibrate at all. The NPC army broke through the city's defensive magic array only with the help of a Tier 5 divine official. The black dragon Feng summoned, on the other hand, was only Tier 3. At best, its strength should only be on par with Tier 4 NPCs. Now, however, the black dragon had actually made Demon City's magic barrier shake so violently with just a single attack. This situation was simply unbelievable. Insane. He must be insane. Flame Feather was confused when she saw the black dragon bombarding the city's magic barrier. By attacking the magic barrier, he's basically declaring his intent to siege the city. Even Battle Wolves didn't dare do such a thing. With this, Demon's Heart's members won't be the only ones taking action. Demon City's NPCs will take action as well. Does Black Flame not know this? It might be fine if Demon City were just a guild city. After all, guild cities fully belong to players. However, NPCs partially owned Demon City. This was why demon players like herself were confident that there were no players capable of threatening Demon City's continued existence at this stage of the game. Back when Battle Wolf sent its army on a crusade against Demon City, it had only set out to kill the demon players operating around Demon City, which would, in turn, weaken Demon City's strength. It had never intended to attack Demon City directly. Now, however, Feng had actually attacked Demon City's magic barrier. He was simply tired of living. Meanwhile, inside Demon's Heart's residence, when troubled times saw the city's magic barrier still standing despite suffering multiple attacks from the Black Dragon, he breathed out a sigh of relief. Previously, he had very nearly thought that Feng would shatter the city's magic barrier. Fortunately, the Black Dragon's attacks were only making the barrier tremble. In other words, the Black Dragon's attacks were still within the barrier's range of tolerance. He really took action? Furious Heart was stunned by this situation. He never thought that Feng would actually attack Demon City directly. He's doomed now. By the time the Vice Guild leader returns, the city's great demon NPCs would have long since taken care of him. Laughed the black-clad elder standing beside Furious Heart. Originally, their side had been helpless against Feng. The only thing they could do was hide inside Demon City's protection and await their Vice Guild leader's team's return. However, Feng had lost all reason and actually launched an attack on Demon City. With this, all they needed to do now was sit back and watch the city's great demon NPCs dispose of Feng. These great demon NPCs were much stronger than human NPCs. The demon monarch that ruled the city was even a frightening existence on par with the heroes of humans. Current players would be helpless against him. Guild leader? At this moment, let alone the resident players of Demon City, even Blue Frost and the others following after Feng were stunned by this situation. In their opinion, it would have been perfect if they could somehow sneak into Demon City and leave swiftly. They never thought that Feng would actually take direct action against Demon City. However, before Blue Frost and the others could react, over a dozen great demons flew out of Demon City. Not only were all these great demons at level 130 or above, but they also radiated a stifling aura. This was especially true for the dignified man flying in the lead of the group of great demons. The man wore exquisite, crimson armor and held an icy war axe in his hand. And surprisingly, he looked nothing like a demon and very much like a human. However, if one used an identification skill on this man, they would discover that he wasn't human at all but a bona fide demon. Moreover, he was a great demon with an extremely prestigious bloodline. Morpheus, Demon Monarch. Great Demon, 2-star Demon Marquis, level 135 HP 700, 000, 000/700, 000, The great demons quickly surrounded the Black Dragon, leaving it with no room to escape. Dragon! This is the demon race's city. You don't belong here, Morpheus declared in a cold tone as he looked at the Black Dragon. Meanwhile, upon hearing Morpheus's words, the resident players of Demon City promptly went into an uproar. Quick look, our city lord is taking action. Black Flame is overestimating himself. Not only did he offend Demon's Heart, but he also dared to touch Demon City. He's doomed now. Black Flame really is courageous. However, I wonder how long he'll be able to stand up against Morpheus? NPCs rarely took action against players. Hence, many players were curious to see the strength of NPCs, especially demon NPCs. Now that there was an opportunity to watch demon NPCs fight a monster-level expert like Feng, everyone naturally grew excited. In response to this situation, Demon's Heart's members started smiling. With over a dozen Tier 4 great demons taking action, even a Tier 4 hero should not dream of escaping unharmed, let alone a Tier 3 player like Feng. However, while Demon's Heart's members were feeling elated over Feng's foolish behavior, a sigh came from the Black Dragon. Sure enough, it is impossible to destroy this magic barrier using only the strength of a Tier 3 dragon. It seems I have no choice but to get serious. Although Feng had spoken in a calm tone, when his voice was relayed through the Black Dragon, it had been loudly amplified. As a result, everyone inside Demon City heard him very clearly. What does he mean? He still hasn't gotten serious until now? An act. He's definitely putting on an act. When Demon's Heart's members heard Feng's words, they instinctively thought that he was putting on an act and that he was actually at his wits' end already. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Do you what? He still has a trump card he hasn't used. Regretful Wind, however, did not think that Feng was boasting. At the same time, though, he also felt that the swordsman couldn't possess a trump card stronger than the Black Dragon. However, before anyone could deduce anything from Feng's words, the Black Dragon suddenly disappeared, leaving Feng himself in its place. At this moment, though, Feng held a thick, ancient tome in his hands, and this tome woke an instinctual fear in every demon player in the city. Damn it! Why is it in your hands? Morpheus's complexion changed dramatically when he saw the ancient tome that Feng held. Before the demon players present could react to the situation, Morpheus turned around and fled back into Demon City. Moreover, he wasn't alone. The dozen or so other great demons also revealed fearful expressions as they zoomed back to the city. Chapter 25-35, Silent Demon City They're running? What's up with these demon NPCs? Seeing Morpheus and the other demon NPCs suddenly turning around and fleeing left Demon City's resident players confused. The NPCs had surrounded Feng's Black Dragon and were even prepared to take action against it. In the end, however, they had fled as soon as Feng himself appeared before them. What was going on here? At this moment, let alone Demon City's resident players, even Demon's Heart's members, who held actual authority over Demon City, were stunned by this situation. What did he do? Why are the demon NPCs afraid of him? Furious Heart was astounded as he stared at Feng, who was currently chanting an incantation in the sky. The intellect of Tier 4 demon NPCs was not the slightest bit inferior to players. It was almost impossible for players to gain any advantage over them. Before these demon NPCs, current players were nothing but a joke. These demon NPCs could squash current players like ants. Not to mention, these demon NPCs had remained calm even when fighting a Tier 5 divine official. Moreover, in the end, they had repelled the Ten Saints Empire's NPC army, allowing Demon City to establish a foothold in the Empire. Now, however, these demon NPCs actually fled like startled mice. However, before Furious Heart could figure out what was going on, Feng finished chanting the final verse of his incantation. His gaze then locked on to a nearby level 134, Tier 4 demon Viscount, who served as the captain of Morpheus's personal security team. In the name of the ruler of demons, submit to my will. Pitch black chains suddenly appeared around the level 134 guard captain, giving off an indescribable pressure that made all the demon NPCs and demon players shudder involuntarily. No, don't take away my will. The guard captain shouted as it struggled intensely to repulse the assault of the pitch black chains. Unfortunately, all its efforts were futile, as the pitch black chains simply ignored the guard captain's resistance and merged with its body. In the next moment, the struggling guard captain turned sluggish, and its eyes became cloudy. It was as if the guard captain had just had its soul sucked away. What did he do? He actually managed to deal with a bona fide Tier 4 demon Viscount with just one move? Every demon player present gaped in shock at this scene. This was a Tier 4 NPC of Demon City. The combat power it possessed far exceeded that of Tier 4 great demons in the outside world. Not to mention, the demon NPC in question was even a great demon that held the rank of Viscount. Its strength practically rivaled that of Tier 4 heroes. Now, however, the demon in question had actually stopped moving. It worked? Feng breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw the guard captain stop moving. The Bible of Darkness held considerable deterrence over demons. In its current state, only Demon King-level demons could resist its power. Demons beneath Demon Kings would instinctively fear the Bible. However, using the Bible of Darkness to take control of demons was not easy. On the surface, the Bible of Darkness's demon ruler had a 12% chance of successfully controlling a demonic creature, so long as the target was not more than 30 levels and 2 tiers higher than the user. In reality, however, the stronger the targeted demon, the lower the chances of controlling it. With Feng's current self, if he tried to control Morpheus, who was a demon marquis, his chances of success would most likely be lower than 1%. This was why he had chosen the Viscount-ranked guard captain as his target. Even so, Feng never thought that he would successfully control the guard captain on the first try. Hence, he had planned on multiple attempts. After all, Demon Ruler had a cooldown of only 5 minutes. If once was not enough, he could simply try a second or third time. As for the possibility of the demon NPCs of Demon City attacking him, he didn't have to worry about that at all. The Bible of Darkness held an absolute suppression over demonic creatures, although this suppression was not particularly effective against demon players. So long as he held the Bible of Darkness, all demonic creatures below Tier 6 would fear him. Tier 5 Demon Kings were no exception. Not only would these demonic creatures have their basic attributes drastically decreased, but even their intellect would be affected quite significantly. Moreover, if worst comes to worst, he still had the 7 Luminaries ring. He could escape to safety whenever he wanted to. Hence, he did not fear Demon City's NPCs at all. These factors were why he dared come to Demon City. After Feng took control of the guard captain, however, the other fleeing demon NPCs promptly halted their retreat and turned to glare at Feng and the controlled guard captain, vigilance and rage burning in their eyes. It seems these demons are aware that I can use Demon Ruler only once within a short period but are afraid of recklessly approaching me due to their hypersensitive nature. Feng smiled as he swept a glance at the vigilant demon NPCs. Unfortunately, you are already too late. After saying so, he controlled the black dragon and had it fly over to his side. He then had it launch another attack at Demon City's magic barrier. What? He's still trying to attack the magic barrier? I don't know why the demon NPCs are so afraid of him, but he is still 100 years too early if he thinks he can destroy Demon City's barrier. Demon's Heart's members were very surprised by Feng's ability to terrify the demon NPCs. However, that was it. Their emotions were limited to surprise. After all, while the demon NPCs were afraid to leave the city to deal with Feng still could not enter Demon City. However, as soon as Demon's Heart's members finished speaking, the demon guard captain that had turned sluggish suddenly started moving. And to everyone's surprise, the guard captain cast the Tier 4 Curse Dark Star at the same point that the black dragon had attacked. In the next moment, the black dragon's claw smashed into the magic barrier's outer surface. At the same time, a gigantic, pitch-black star also smashed into the magic barrier's inner surface. Boom! Upon receiving attacks from both inside and outside, the defensive magic array instantly shattered. Cracks bloomed all over the magic barrier that protected Demon City. In just a few seconds, the cracks had extended throughout the magic barrier. When looking up from Demon City right now, the spectating demon players found themselves looking at a cracked sky. Silence. Absolute silence. At this moment, as if time had frozen for Demon City, every player residing in the city was gazing at the sky in stunned silence, both their eyes and mouths wide open. Just then, a series of system notifications entered the ears of all demon players operating within the Burning Forest region, the emotionless voice of the system echoing in their minds for a long time. 2536 Slaying Troubled Times Chapter 2536. Slaying Troubled Times Burning Forest Region System Announcement. Human players have broken through Demon City's defensive magic array. All demon players based in Demon City will have their city reputation reduced by 10 points and city contribution by 3,000 points. Boost to Power of Darkness will also be reduced by 20%. Burning Forest Region System Announcement. Demon City's defensive magic array has been broken. Ruling Guild of the city will have its popularity reduced by 5,000 points. All benefits provided by Demon City will be halved for 7 natural days. All quests given out in Demon City will have their rewards reduced by 30%. The system announcement repeated throughout the Burning Forest 3 times, causing a deathly silence to befall the forest. Someone broke through Demon City's defensive magic array? Didn't they say that even the 10 Saints Empire's NPC army was helpless against Demon City? How could players possibly break through the city's defensive magic array? Who did it? Could it be those people Demon's Heart placed a bounty on before? The demon players grinding and questing inside the Burning Forest were flabbergasted by the system announcement. Some players even fell into a daze in battle and nearly got themselves killed by monsters. Since Demon City's construction until now, aside from battle wolves, no power or player had truly managed to put pressure on Demon City. Now, however, not only did someone put pressure on Demon City, but they had even destroyed the city's defensive magic array. This was simply unbelievable. The shock the demon players felt upon receiving this piece of information was akin to human players hearing about some other player breaking through the defenses of a kingdom's capital. It was simply unthinkable. Meanwhile, inside Demon City, the resident players remained in a daze long after the incident. Like robots that had jammed, their mouths kept opening and closing wordlessly as they stared up into the empty sky above them. Damn it! How did he do it? This is a main city-level defensive magic array. As Furious Heart stared at Sherfong hovering in the sky, unprecedented shock filled him. He never imagined that Sherfong would actually succeed in destroying Demon City's defensive magic array. Back when the 10 Saints Empire's army had attacked, it had taken a Tier 5 divine official to destroy the city's defensive magic array. The defensive magic array had stood strong even under the bombardment of over a dozen Tier 4 NPCs. Now, however, Sherfong, a Tier 3 player, had single-handedly destroyed the city's defensive magic array. Moreover, he had accomplished this feat with just one attack. This was definitely a bug. However, it was also almost impossible for the main god system to make an error. Even if there were an error in the system, it wouldn't be on such a monumental scale. What Furious Heart did not know was that, in God's domain, all magic arrays had weaknesses. The defensive magic array of major cities was no exception. They all had mana junctions that were much more fragile compared to the other parts of the magic array. Normally, though, ordinary players couldn't locate these weak points. Moreover, with how large a city-scale defensive magic array was, trying to find these weak points was akin to looking for a needle in a haystack. However, that was not the case for Sherfong. After he became an intermediate master magician, his understanding of magic arrays had reached completely new heights. Now, let alone Demon City's defensive magic array, even if faced with a main city-level defensive magic array of a kingdom that had been in existence for over a century, he was still confident he could find the magic array's weak points. Previously, Sherfong had planned to break through Demon City's defensive magic array by having the Black Dragon attack the magic array's weak points. However, the damage tolerance of the weak points exceeded the amount of damage the Black Dragon could inflict. As a result, the Black Dragon only managed to shave off a certain amount of the magic array's energy reserves with its attacks. However, after gaining control over the Tier 4 Demon Guard Captain, he was able to have the Guard Captain and Black Dragon attack the same location simultaneously, thereby combining their strength and executing an attack that exceeded the magic array's damage tolerance. Only then did he succeed in instantly shattering Demon City's defensive magic array. If not for the Guard Captain falling into his control, he really would have been helpless against Demon City. Meanwhile, as everyone remained stunned by this unexpected development, Feng, who had Gale Domain activated, flew to the space above Demon's Heart's residence. He then quietly observed the crowded residence below him. "Troubled Times, it's your turn now," Feng said when he spotted Troubled Times, ignoring the tens of thousands of Demon's Heart members around. Feng's words were akin to a death knell. Upon hearing these words, Demon's Heart's members could not help but turn to look at Troubled Times, who stood at a corner of the residence's plaza, pity appearing in their eyes. Troubled Times should have been safe after escaping to Demon City. Now, however, that was no longer true. If Feng could destroy even Demon City's defensive magic array in a single attack, who could possibly stand up to him? Even if Feng had relied on the strength of the Demon Guard captain to accomplish this feat, this could also be considered a portion of the swordsman's strength. After all, not everyone was capable of controlling a Tier 4 Great Demon, a demon NPC at that. Black Flame, you'd better not go too far. This is Demon's Heart's residence. Furious Heart bellowed when he saw that Feng was completely ignoring Demon's Heart's members. "You've already destroyed Demon City's defensive magic array and caused Demon's Heart's prestige to plummet. If you kill Troubled Times, you'll make an out-and-out enemy of Demon's Heart. You'd better think this through clearly." Feng's strength was indeed terrifying. However, Demon's Heart was not in existence to provoke easily. It was the first dark guild in God's domain to establish a city for demons. In an era where dark powers were flourishing, even super guilds would not dare to offend Demon's Heart casually. Demon's Heart might not have the ability to deal with a monster like Feng, but Zero Wing was a different story. A guild was different from an individual. A guild was an organization made up of thousands, and possibly even millions, of players. So long as Demon's Heart slaughtered Zero Wing's other members, even if Feng remained unharmed, Zero Wing would still fall into ruin. This was also the reason why the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers chose to take a step back when dealing with Demon's Heart. So what? Do you think Zero Wing is a guild you can casually provoke? Feng said as he glanced askance at Furious Heart. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Black Dragon immediately descended from the skies and appeared above Troubled Times. It then swiped a claw at the Berserker. Light Shadow. No! When Troubled Times saw the mountain-like claw smashing down toward him, he instinctively activated demonification, followed by a life-saving skill to protect himself. Unfortunately, before a Tier 3 dragon, a Tier 3 demon player like Troubled Times was no different from an ant. When the Black Dragon's claw came into contact with Troubled Times, the Berserker got crushed into the ground and died just like that. Chapter 2536. Slaying Troubled Times Burning Forest Region System Announcement. Human players have broken through Demon City's defensive magic array. All demon players based in Demon City will have their city reputation reduced by 10 points and city contribution by 3,000 points. Boost to Power of Darkness will also be reduced by 20%. Burning Forest Region System Announcement. Demon City's defensive magic array has been broken. Ruling Guild of the city will have its popularity reduced by 5,000 points. All benefits provided by Demon City will be halved for 7 natural days. All quests given out in Demon City will have their rewards reduced by 30%. The system announcement repeated throughout the Burning Forest 3 times, causing a deathly silence to befall the forest. Someone broke through Demon City's defensive magic array? Didn't they say that even the Ten Saints Empire's NPC army was helpless against Demon City? How could players possibly break through the city's defensive magic array? Who did it? Could it be those people Demon's Heart placed a bounty on before? The demon players grinding and questing inside the Burning Forest were flabbergasted by the system announcement. Some players even fell into a daze in battle and nearly got themselves killed by monsters. Since Demon City's construction until now, aside from battle wolves, no power or player had truly managed to put pressure on Demon City. Now, however, not only did someone put pressure on Demon City, but they had even destroyed the city's defensive magic array. This was simply unbelievable. The shock the demon players felt upon receiving this piece of information was akin to human players hearing about some other player breaking through the defenses of a kingdom's capital. It was simply unthinkable. Meanwhile, inside Demon City, the resident players remained in a daze long after the incident. Like robots that had jammed, their mouths kept opening and closing wordlessly as they stared up into the empty sky above them. Damn it! How did he do it? This is a main city-level defensive magic array. As Furious Heart stared at Shifeng hovering in the sky, unprecedented shock filled him. He never imagined that Shifeng would actually succeed in destroying Demon City's defensive magic array. Back when the Ten Saints Empire's army had attacked, it had taken a Tier 5 divine official to destroy the city's defensive magic array. The defensive magic array had stood strong even under the bombardment of over a dozen Tier 4 NPCs. Now, however, Shifeng, a Tier 3 player, had single-handedly destroyed the city's defensive magic array. Moreover, he had accomplished this feat with just one attack. This was definitely a bug. However, it was also almost impossible for the main god system to make an error. Even if there were an error in the system, it wouldn't be on such a monumental scale. What Furious Heart did not know was that, in God's domain, all magic arrays had weaknesses. The defensive magic array of major cities was no exception. They all had mana junctions that were much more fragile compared to the other parts of the magic array. Normally, though, ordinary players couldn't locate these weak points. Moreover, with how large a city-scale defensive magic array was, trying to find these weak points was akin to looking for a needle in a haystack. However, that was not the case for Shifeng. After he became an intermediate master magician, his understanding of magic arrays had reached completely new heights. Now, let alone Demon City's defensive magic array, even if faced with a main city-level defensive magic array of a kingdom that had been in existence for over a century, he was still confident he could find the magic array's weak points. Previously, Shifeng had planned to break through Demon City's defensive magic array by having the Black Dragon attack the magic array's weak points. However, the damage tolerance of the weak points exceeded the amount of damage the Black Dragon could inflict. As a result, the Black Dragon only managed to shave off a certain amount of the magic array's energy reserves with its attacks. However, after gaining control over the Tier 4 Demon Guard Captain, he was able to have the Guard Captain and Black Dragon attack the same location simultaneously, thereby combining their strength and executing an attack that exceeded the magic array's damage tolerance. Only then did he succeed in instantly shattering Demon City's defensive magic array. If not for the Guard Captain falling into his control, he really would have been helpless against Demon City. Meanwhile, as everyone remained stunned by this unexpected development, Shifeng, who had Gale Domain activated, flew to the space above Demon's Heart's residence. He then quietly observed the crowded residence below him. "Troubled Times, it's your turn now," Shifeng said when he spotted Troubled Times, ignoring the tens of thousands of Demon's Heart members around. Shifeng's words were akin to a death knell. Upon hearing these words, Demon's Heart's members could not help but turn to look at Troubled Times, who stood at a corner of the residence's plaza, pity appearing in their eyes. Troubled Times should have been safe after escaping to Demon City. Now, however, that was no longer true. If Shifeng could destroy even Demon City's defensive magic array in a single attack, who could possibly stand up to him? Even if Shifeng had relied on the strength of the Demon Guard Captain to accomplish this feat, this could also be considered a portion of the swordsman's strength. After all, not everyone was capable of controlling a Tier 4 Great Demon, a demon NPC at that. Black Flame, you'd better not go too far. This is Demon's Heart's residence. Furious Heart bellowed when he saw that Shifeng was completely ignoring Demon's Heart's members. You've already destroyed Demon City's defensive magic array and caused Demon's Heart's prestige to plummet. If you kill Troubled Times, you'll make an out-and-out enemy of Demon's Heart. You'd better think this through clearly. Shifeng's strength was indeed terrifying. However, Demon's Heart was not in existence to provoke easily. It was the first dark guild in God's domain to establish a city for demons. In an era where dark powers were flourishing, even super guilds would not dare to offend Demon's Heart casually. Demon's Heart might not have the ability to deal with a monster like Shifeng, but Zero Wing was a different story. A guild was different from an individual. A guild was an organization made up of thousands, and possibly even millions, of players. So long as Demon's Heart slaughtered Zero Wing's other members, even if Shifeng remained unharmed, Zero Wing would still fall into ruin. This was also the reason why the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers chose to take a step back when dealing with Demon's Heart. So what? Do you think Zero Wing is a guild you can casually provoke? Shifeng said as he glanced askance at Furious Heart. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Black Dragon immediately descended from the skies and appeared above Troubled Times. It then swiped a claw at the Berserker. Light Shadow. No! When Troubled Times saw the mountain-like claw smashing down toward him, he instinctively activated Demonification, followed by a life-saving skill to protect himself. Unfortunately, before a Tier 3 dragon, a Tier 3 demon player like Troubled Times was no different from an ant. When the Black Dragon's claw came into contact with Troubled Times, the Berserker got crushed into the ground and died just like that. Chapter 2537, Single-handedly suppressing Demon's Heart when Troubled Times died. Silence blanketed Demon City again as everyone stared at Shifeng hovering in the air. He killed him just like that? The city's independent players had never thought Shifeng would dare attack a player in the middle of Demon's Heart's residence, yet he had done so without the slightest hesitation. He acted as if the Dark Guild's members were nothing of consequence. He's done it. Blue Frost and the other Zero Wing members from the Dark Den, who had watched the scene play out through a magic mirror, were especially dumbfounded. They had never imagined that Shifeng would successfully kill Troubled Times. Moreover, their guild leader had done so as Demon's Heart's members watched. Blue Frost and his comrades felt as if they were dreaming. They would have already been amazed if they managed to sneak into Demon City and assassinate Troubled Times, but Shifeng had boldly and openly slain his prey. While Zero Wing's Dark Den members were stunned, Furious Heart, who stood within Demon's Heart's residence, shot Shifeng a furious look, his rage burning clear in his eyes. Black Flame, you and your entire guild are dead. Not even our guild leader will let you get away with killing someone in our residence, let alone Vice Guild leader Flaming Light. Furious Heart bellowed. He hadn't actually expected Shifeng to attack Troubled Times without a second thought. The attack had been so sudden that he hadn't even had the time to try to save the Berserker. A guild residence was a guild's most treasured location. If word spread that Demon's Heart couldn't even protect a single player within its residence, the Dark Guild's reputation would suffer. Is that so? Shifeng asked, indifferently glancing down at Furious Heart. Feel free to test us. Zero Wing is ready for whatever you can throw our way. If you have nothing else to say, I'll be taking my leave. Every player in the residence went into an uproar after hearing Shifeng's blatant disregard for their guild. Crap. This bastard is too arrogant. Elder Heart, let's attack him together. I refuse to believe that we can't end his miserable life. The guild elders in the residence were incensed, and they tried to persuade Furious Heart to move against the swordsman as a unit. Troubled Time's death was humiliating for Demon's Heart, and if they allowed Shifeng to leave safely, nothing would remain of the guild's reputation. No, let him go. Furious Heart growled through gritted teeth, gesturing for the guild elders to back away. When Shifeng realized that none of the Dark Guild's members intended to strike, he turned and flew away from the residence and Demon City. Are you just going to let him go, Heart? The black-clad Viscount Elder demanded as he watched Shifeng fly off. Do you really think that I don't want to take his life right this instant? Furious Heart hissed, glaring at the black-clad Elder. Rather, do you think that any one of you is strong enough to kill him? Rebellious Thunder was the strongest player in Demon City right now, but if Shifeng could even slay Rebellious Thunder, what could they, who hadn't even reached Demon Count rank, possibly achieve by fighting that swordsman? Don't we have the Demon Guards? I refuse to believe that he can survive a battle against over a dozen Tier 4 Demon Guards. The black-clad Elder argued. The Demon Guards in question weren't like the demon NPCs that had surrounded and subsequently fled from Shifeng. Demon's Heart didn't have any control over the city's NPCs, but its demon guards were a different story. If they paid the appropriate price, their demon guards would do everything in their power to take Reshaping down. The black-clad elder had also estimated that Reshaping could only control one demon NPC with whatever means allowed him to do so. Controlling multiple Tier 4 demons should be impossible. If they sent over a dozen Tier 4 demon guards to surround Reshaping, he wouldn't stand a chance, even with the demon guard captain on his side. Ending the swordsman within Demon City was entirely possible. Do you assume that I haven't thought of that? Furious Heart shot back, rolling his eyes at the elder. Grimly, he continued, I considered mobilizing the demon guards the moment Black Flame arrived above the residence, but when he did, the demon guards' basic attributes fell by 30%. They wouldn't even be able to deal with Black Flame in such a state, much less the demon guard captain under his control. Reshaping was already as powerful as a Tier 4 being, which he had proven in the fight against Rebellious Thunder when they had clashed as equals. With 30% less basic attributes, the demon guards had no chance against Reshaping. Reshaping was a domain realm expert. Sending a bunch of dumb monsters with inferior attributes to take him out would be nothing more than a joke. But it's so frustrating watching him go unscathed, the black-clad elder hissed, gnashing his teeth as he watched Reshaping's figure move farther away. Demon's Heart had gone to great lengths to earn the prestige it had enjoyed in Demon City only minutes ago. Now that Reshaping had dealt such a severe blow, restoring their reputation would take ages if they simply allowed him to leave. So what if he leaves? I've already notified the guild leader and vice-guild leader Light. Black Flame won't enjoy this victory for long. Furious Heart said, his eyes narrowing as he glared at Reshaping's departing figure. At the moment, Demon's Heart was indeed helpless before Reshaping, but once the guild leader and vice-guild leader Flaming Light returned, it would be a different story. Those two individuals were the guild's true pillars of strength. Even the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers feared those two players' strength and the foundation they'd created for the Dark Guild, going as far as to form alliances in secret with Demon's Heart. Since Reshaping had shredded Demon's Heart's reputation, the guild leader and vice-guild leader wouldn't rest until the matter was settled. While Reshaping flew away from Demon's Heart's residence, another commotion broke out among the city's residents. What? Demon's Heart actually let him get away? Weren't there quite a few Tier 4 demon guards stationed in Demon's Heart's residence? Why didn't the guild mobilize them? Is he even human? Reshaping's safe departure from the Dark Guild's residence stunned Demon City's players. None of them had expected the invasion to end like this. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Demon's Heart was one of the top dark powers in God's domain, yet not only had Reshaping single-handedly broken into Demon City, Demon's Heart's main headquarters, but he had also slain troubled times within the guild's residence. To top it all off, Reshaping had flown away from the residence unharmed. No one would believe this story if they told it. And yet they had all watched it happen. Even more astonishing, Demon's Heart had remained silent during the entire process. Not one of the guild's members had tried to attack Reshaping. They were all demon players, absolute dark players. Starting a fight with someone over the slightest offense was normal for them, especially for Demon's Heart's members. However, even the Dark Guild's members seemed afraid of a single human player. It was unbelievable. While Reshaping departed from Demon City, news of the encounter spread like wildfire throughout the Ten Saints Empire. Chapter 2538, Ten Saints Empire Shaken. Correct decision. Ten Saints Empire, Heavenly Saint Capital City, Battle Wolves Residence. A man in crimson armor and covered in illusory flames sat quietly before a crimson greatsword with his eyes closed in the top-floor lounge of a guild hall that was nearly 100 meters tall. Although this man didn't make the slightest move, the sword and flames around it circled the man as if they had a life of their own. Divine runes began to appear in the air, one after another, attracting all of the ambient fire-type mana and suffusing it with the man. As more mana filled him, his aura grew more intense. After a few seconds, the man's aura was as intense as that of a Tier 4 being. He felt as he had transformed into a fire demon as brilliant flames filled the room. If Shifeng saw this, he'd certainly be surprised. The man bathing in the crimson flames was none other than Sirius, one of Battle Wolf's old monsters. Not only did Sirius command Tier 4 strength, but his control of fire-type mana was also greater than Shifeng's, who had mastered a mana technique. Sirius manipulated the mana like an extension of his own body, with utter and delicate control. Now, he could even control the flow of different streams of fire-type mana. When Sirius finally reopened his eyes, the crimson fire around him took on a white-blue hue, and the room's temperature instantly rose by several hundred degrees. Not even ordinary Tier 2 players could approach the man before they burned to death. I've finally finished absorbing this Fire Saint bloodline. It's about time I pay Demon City another visit, Sirius said, smiling as he examined the blue divine runes on his arms. During the battle in the Burning Forest, Demon's Heart's Vice Guild leader, Flaming Light, had defeated him. He had initially given up hope of defeating Flaming Light anytime soon, but the guild had been fortunate enough to find an extremely rare advanced bloodline, the Fire Saint bloodline. At first, he had assumed the Fire Saint bloodline would only increase his strength by a fraction, but now that he had fully unified with it, he understood how terrifying it was. He was even confident that he could now barge into Demon City and walk out with his life, let alone exact his vengeance against Flaming Light. As Sirius prepared to leave the lounge, however, a tall, middle-aged man with an imposing aura burst in. This man was Everlasting War, who had previously served as the Glorious Lions battle team's leader. "Commander, we've just received an update regarding Demon City. The report states that not only has Black Flame broken into the city, but he's also slain Troubled Times, who had hidden within Demon's Heart's residence," Everlasting War announced. Troubled Times died inside Demon's Heart's residence? The news stunned Sirius, and for a moment he wondered if he had misheard. He was already amazed that Shifeng had his team had made it to Demon City. Despite dispatching an army of over 100,000 experts, Battle Wolves hadn't even caught a glimpse of the city's gate. But now, he learned that Shifeng had broken into the city and killed Troubled Times within Demon's Heart's residence. It was astounding. Demon's Heart has lost most of its prestige in Demon City and now poses much less of a threat to the various superpowers. "Should we still head to Demon City, Commander?" Everlasting War asked Sirius, who wore a strange expression. News of Troubled Times' death had already spread throughout the Ten Saints Empire. Keeping the matter under wraps was impossible for Demon's Heart. Meanwhile, the situation had robbed Battle Wolves of the revenge it sought for the humiliation it had suffered. If the guild targeted Demon's Heart now, it would only earn the label of bully, tarnishing the guild's reputation further. "We no longer need to visit Demon City. Instead, we should visit Zero Wing," Sirius said. To achieve such a feat, Black Flame is indeed impressive. Unfortunately, Demon's Heart isn't a trivial opponent, and Flaming Light is particularly troublesome. If that weren't the case, the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers would never have willingly allied with the Dark Guild. "Understood. I'll take care of the necessary preparations," Everlasting War said. After giving the matter some thought, he agreed with his commander's decisions. 2 or 3 days ago, Everlasting War would have thought Zero Wing had just won a major victory, but based on what information Battle Wolves had gathered, Demon's Heart had more power in level 100 neutral maps than Zero Wing could imagine. All Shifeng had done was yank on the tiger's whiskers by tarnishing Demon's Heart's reputation. The act was both ignorant and foolish. Meanwhile, all of the various superpowers that learned of Shifeng's accomplishments were similarly astonished. None of them had thought that Shifeng would shake Demon City to its very foundations. The swordsman's strength was simply inhuman. Surprisingly, however, the Ten Saints Empire had remained extraordinarily calm despite the news. None of the various superpowers, which deeply hated demon players, had shown any movement. Not one of them had tried to kick Demon City while it was down. Rather, the Empire's superpowers had sent a large number of experts to Zero Wing's territories. This turn of events was indescribably strange. Have these superpowers gone mad, Vice Guild leader? They're not taking advantage of the situation to put pressure on Demon's Heart and are aiming for Zero Wing instead. the Tier 3 black-clad assassin beside Illusory Words said after examining the details the guild's information network had gathered. Did they miss the system announcement in the Burning Forest? The demon player's development speed in that area has substantially decreased. This is the perfect opportunity to strike. They haven't gone crazy, Illusory Words, who was busy sifting through the reports, replied, shaking her head. They've only made the correct decision. Correct decision? The statement confused the Tier 3 assassin. He didn't understand what Illusory Words meant by that. Since Shi Feng had destroyed Demon City's defensive magic array, all of the city's demon players have suffered a 20% strength reduction. This was the best chance the various superpowers had to eliminate those demon players. Demon's Heart had stopped the Empire's various superpowers from acquiring as many resources from level 100 neutral maps. Those superpowers would only secure more if they suppressed the Dark Guild now. That's right, Illusory Words said, her lips twisting into a bitter smile. Very few of the various superpowers members are aware of how frightening Demon's Heart truly is. The Dark Guild has already allied with mythology, one of the 5 great superpowers. Both its overall strength and its foundations are far superior to Zero Wings. Naturally, the various superpowers want to take advantage of Zero Wing, not Demon's Heart. Demon's Heart has actually partnered with mythology? Realization immediately dawned on the Tier 3 assassin. He was also surprised by how formidable Demon's Heart was. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU mythology was one of the 5 major titans in God's domain and far stronger than ordinary superpowers like Crimson Emperor. Ordinary super guilds couldn't even compare. If mythology were supporting Demon's Heart, the Dark Guild wouldn't have to worry about its development, even after the recent events. While the Ten Saints Empire's superpowers were busy attacking Zero Wing, a handsome man in white arrived at a mana-rich location outside of the Fire Dragon Empire. This man was Flaming Light, Demon's Heart's famous Vice Guild leader. Not long after his arrival, 2 level 107, Tier 3 peak experts intercepted him. What business do you have here? A Tier 3 shield warrior demanded, flashing Flaming Light a contemptuous look. I have something I need to discuss with Vice Guild leader Cold Shadow. May I know if she has time to spare? Flaming Light cordially asked. Chapter 2539, Abyssal Blades Fragment Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City. With troubled times dead, Shi Feng returned to Stone Forest Town with the Hell Legion. He didn't linger in the Ten Saints Empire for a moment longer. The moment Hell Rush and his comrades entered Stone Forest City, the sight that greeted them left them stunned. Stone Forest City was a guild city, and normally, only players visited guild cities in level 100+ neutral maps. NPCs rarely visited such guild cities, yet Stone Forest City was full of them. There was even a long line of NPC merchants waiting to enter the city at the main entrance. Calling the city an NPC city wouldn't be an exaggeration. Hell Rush was also stupefied when he saw the number and quality of players visiting Zero Wing City. He spotted several dozen Tier 3 players with a casual glance around the main street. Although the various superpowers had over 100 Tier 3 players at this stage of the game, and some even had several hundred, Tier 3 players were still a rarity as a whole. No matter where they went, they attracted a lot of attention. However, Tier 3 players in Stone Forest City were just as common as ordinary, Tier 2 experts. So, this is Zero Wings Guild City? Thunder Beast muttered, looking around him in astonishment. The Hell Legion had a total of 300 Tier 3 experts, which was a staggering number no matter where they went, but it was nothing in Stone Forest City. From what he could see, there were easily more than 1,000 Tier 3 experts wandering the city's main street alone. Even Blue Frost and Zero Wings Dark Den members were stunned. Shelters in the Dark Den didn't even have more than 100 Tier 3 experts at this stage. They were still highly sought after in the Dark Denver. And yet, even a random street on Stone Forest City had more Tier 3 players than any of Dark Den's shelters. Blue, you bastard, you kept us in the dark this? If we knew our guild had such a magnificent city, we would 1v join Zero Wing long ago. A Tier 3 cursemancer, who had just joined Shelter 1 Zero Wing, scolded the Vice Guild leader as he admired the crowd of Tier 3 players. The Cursmancer estimated that Stone Forest City easily had multiple times more Tier 3 players than all of the Dark Den. Ordinary players might not care how many Tier 3 players a town or city had, but it was a significant matter to someone who played a management role in Shelter 1. Every player's value was different, especially in towns and cities. A city could benefit from a Tier 3 expert far more than from a Tier 2 expert, particularly when it came to resources. Tier 3 experts simply had access to more and better quality resources than Tier 2 players because they could explore locations that were too dangerous for the weaker players. In a city full of Tier 3 experts, players unwittingly added resources to the town, even if they weren't a member of the ruling guild, which, in turn, attracted more experts. Another benefit came in the form of leveling. God's Domain's mainstream players had already reached level 100 and beyond, and after level 100, players needed far more EXP to reach each subsequent level. Players also needed to defeat much stronger monsters. Thus, they would need Tier 3 players' help if they wanted to level up quickly. This was also why the Dark Den's players preferred to develop in powerful shelters. With how many Tier 3 experts wandered Stone Forest City streets, these players' leveling speed would be incredible. The Dark Den's various shelters couldn't even imagine how fast these players reached their next level. If the Dark Den's players knew that Zero Wing ruled a guild city like this, every one of them would immediately try to join the guild. Blue Frost, however, did not have a good response for the Cursemancer's complaint. Although he had always known that Zero Wing was extraordinary, he had never dreamed that it was this powerful. However, Blue Frost and his companions didn't know that many superpowers had sent their experts to Stone Forest City precisely because of Shurfeng's recent performance in Demon City. In fact, the Ten Saints Empire's superpowers had been some of the first. Not only had they sent a large number of scouts, but they had also sent quite a few guild upper echelons. Because of this, Stone Forest City's player population had reached an all-time high, and there was an unprecedented number of Tier 3 experts in the city. Meanwhile, 3 level 108 plus Tier 3 experts enjoyed Stone Forest City's specialty cuisine in a high-class restaurant's top-floor VIP room not far away from Zero Wing's residence, quietly observing Shurfeng's group as they entered. 2 of the 3 were Yuan Tiexin and Purple Jade from the Secret Pavilion, while the third was a young woman in her mid-20s. If Shurfeng had known about this gathering, he'd be surprised. Yuan Tiexin and Purple Jade were showing the woman deference. Even as she spoke to her companion, Purple Jade's eyes glowed with reverence and respect. Although she was the Secret Pavilion's #1 genius, she displayed no arrogance before the woman. So, he's Black Flame? He really is something. It's a pity he has offended Demon's heart. With his presence and Stone Forest City's assistance, it wouldn't have been long before Zero Wing had joined the realm of God's Domain's superpowers. Otherwise, the young woman with long, icy blue hair said as she watched Shurfeng disappear into Zero Wing's residence, smiling softly. "Are you certain that you won't reconsider, Vice Guild Leader Dawn? Stone Forest City is now the #1 city in the Cold Spring Forest and several neighboring level 100 neutral maps. If you step forward, I'm sure Demon's heart will hold back against the city," Yuan Tiexin respectfully pleaded with the young woman. The woman before him was Dawn Jade, and he had nothing but respect for her. Dawn Jade was most likely to succeed the Secret Pavilion's guild leader in the future, and her current position was only second to the guild leader's. Before his assault on Demon City, I could understand why the guild leader had such an optimistic opinion of Zero Wing, but Elder Yuan, you know times have changed. The dark powers have far more influence over God's domain than they used to, especially Demon's Heart, which stands at the peak of the many dark powers. But Black Flame mercilessly killed someone Flaming Light was protecting, and the various dark powers think this is a good opportunity to set an example for God's domain's various superpowers, Dawn Jade said. Sighing, she continued, Zero Wing has provoked far too many superpowers. Based on recent reports, aside from mythology, Flaming Light has begun to negotiate a partnership with Beast Emperor, who currently occupies the Ore Empire. Not even the guild leader can prevent Zero Wing's fall at this point. Black Flame only has himself and his stubborn nature to blame. I doubt even Netherworld Empire's Hell Legion can save his guild. Your people should prepare as well. I'm sure it won't be long before Demon's Heart makes it move. But don't worry too much. I'll think of a way to retain our shares of Stone Forest City. Once Dawn Jade finished speaking, she made a cutting gesture with a hand, summoning a spatial gate. She then walked through the gate, vanishing from the restaurant. Silence dominated the room for a long time after the young woman's departure. Uncle Yuan, what should we do? If the Vice Guild leader won't help us, we won't have enough forces to defend Stone Forest City, even if we gather all of our players, Purple Jade asked. Few knew of the true terror of Demon's Heart. Once the Dark Guild took action, Cold Spring Forest would become a nest for dark players. Flaming Light possessed the means to open a portal to a dark world, allowing the Otherworld's players to flood onto the main continent. This was the true reason that even super guilds were afraid of Demon's Heart. Only, Flaming Light wanted Demon's Heart to establish a stable foothold in God's domain, so he hadn't actually used this card. Once he did, he'd lose it, and he'd have to wage war against whichever superpower or superpowers his actions affected. Unfortunately, Flaming Light wouldn't hold back against Zero Wing now that Shifeng had damaged Demon's Heart's reputation so severely. With the guild's current strength, it would find threatening Zero Wing quite difficult. Thus, the chances of Flaming Light activating the portal in Cold Spring Forest were very high. The Dark World was far stronger than many other major otherworlds, and it easily had a player population that could rival 2 or 3 empires. Moreover, every player in the Dark World was a dark player. Once Flaming Light activated the portal in Cold Spring Forest, Stone Forest City would have to face a storm of dark players. Its chances of surviving were practically non-existent. In fact, the portal's activation would also have an unprecedented impact on the nearby kingdoms and empires. I don't know. Let's just take one step at a time, Yuan Tiexian replied, and he couldn't help but glance in Shifeng's direction, rolling his eyes. Rather than quietly developing Zero Wing, Shifeng had gone through God's domain, making one enemy after another. Now, even the secret pavilion could save the guild. They could only watch as Zero Wing burned to the ground. During Yuan Tiexian and Purple Jade's meeting in the nearby restaurant, Shifeng had made his way to the second underground floor in Zero Wing's guild hall. After entering the core room, he activated the room's defensive magic array and sealed off the entire floor. He then carefully pulled a pitch-black blade from his bag, placing it on the central platform. The blade was none other than Rebellious Thunder's Cruel Darkness. Initially, Shifeng hadn't paid the magic weapon Rebellious Thunder had dropped much mind. He had been utterly focused on killing the man at the time. However, while the Black Dragon had bombarded Demon City's defensive magic array, he had offhandedly collected Cruel Darkness from its previous wielder's ashes. When he had picked the magic weapon up, he had discovered that Cruel Darkness resonated with his Abyssal Blade, which he had found endlessly exciting. 2 weapons only resonated in God's domain when both were a part of the original weapon. In other words, they were weapon fragments. As a magic weapon, the Abyssal Blade was already ridiculously strong, powerful enough to rival fragmented legendary weapons in its current state. Hence, Shifeng had been flabbergasted to learn that the Abyssal Blade was only a fragmented weapon, not a complete one. If that were true, how strong would the complete weapon be? Would it become a fragmented legendary weapon? Or a legendary weapon? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. With this astonishing discovery occupying his thoughts, Shifeng had slain troubled times before hurrying back to Stone Forest City. This should be safe enough. Hopefully, the fusion doesn't cause too much of a commotion. After examining Cruel Darkness, Shifeng unsheathed the Abyssal Blade, and as a result, he received a system notification. System, the Abyssal Blade has discovered a fragment of the same origin. Do you wish to fuse the fragment with the Abyssal Blade? Fuse them. Chapter 2540, Recasting. A sword of old Shifeng's heart pounded nervously as he chose to fuse the 2 weapons. What he needed more than anything right now was a good weapon. His Abyssal Blade and Killing Ray had been excellent weapons and better than most, if not all, of the various superpowers weapons before level 100. However, the various superpowers had begun collecting more top-tier weapons now that players had crossed that threshold. In fact, top-tier weapons had become so common that weapons of the Abyssal Blade and Killing Ray's caliber were now a standard for players of his strength. Because of this, the Abyssal Blade and Killing Ray were now his shortcomings, particularly the Abyssal Blade. If he hadn't acquired multiple pieces of fragmented legendary equipment and an extraordinary bloodline, the various superpowers Apex experts would have long since surpassed his basic attributes. Of course, fusing two weapon fragments in God's domain wasn't an easy task. The process was akin to recasting a weapon, but in this scenario, players had to fuse the two weapons before they could recast them, rather than simply recasting a single weapon. If the forger responsible for recasting the weapons didn't have a certain level of mastery, they could destroy both weapons. Of course, only the weapons would be destroyed. The fragments would remain, although one wouldn't be able to use them as weapons. After Feng agreed to fuse the Abyssal Blade and Cruel Darkness, both weapons instantly shattered, transforming into a cloud of ink-black dust. The cloud then solidified into the form of a rough sword hilt and blade. The two fragments looked nothing like they had a moment ago, but they both radiated frighteningly powerful auras that even made Feng shudder. For a moment, he faintly saw the phantom of a dragon head, spreading its jaws and threatening to devour him. They're just fragments, yet their auras are so powerful? Feng stared at the two weapon fragments in astonishment. The combined aura was even stronger than that of the Abyssal Blade when it was fully liberated. Feng found it really hard to imagine just how powerful the original weapon had been before it had broken. He estimated that it should have at least been legendary rank. He couldn't help the envy he felt. If he were dealing with a legendary weapon, he would have to be very careful. On the off chance that he made a mistake and the recasting failed, not only would he lose the Abyssal Blade, but he'd also have to search for more materials to try again. Naturally, he'd need legendary ranked materials. Legendary materials were incredibly rare in God's domain. Even the various superpowers of his previous life had struggled to collect a single set of legendary materials to recast a legendary weapon, not to mention Zero Wing. When he had first obtained Cruel Darkness, he had intended to seek out Ciliora for help with the recasting. A Grandmaster Forger was capable of producing legendary items, after all. Recasting a legendary item from weapon fragments should be a piece of cake for her. When he evolved the Abyssal Blade to Tier 3, however, even the Candlelight Trading Firm's defensive magic array had very nearly failed to contain the magic weapon's unrestrained aura. If recasting this weapon caused too much of a commotion and caught the public's attention, it could spell his doom. What lay before him was a magic weapon, and he was likely to face a backlash once the recast was complete. If that happened, he'd be at his weakest and vulnerable to attack. If the various superpowers happened to have experts stationed near White River City, he'd be doomed. Naturally, Ciliora, as an NPC, wouldn't try to protect him. At best, he'd have to rely on the city's NPC soldiers to fend off any hostile players, but by the time they responded to an attack, they'd be too late. Feng's worries weren't unfounded. Such instances had happened quite a few times in the past. Many players had assumed that they'd be safe in NPC cities when they upgraded their magic weapons, but in the end, other players had taken their lives, and they had still suffered their magic weapons backlash. After all was said and done, their characters had been crippled. Not wanting to take the risk, Feng decided to recast the weapon himself within Stone Forest City's walls. Fortunately, he was already an intermediate master forger. Even without Ciliora's help, he qualified to recast a legendary weapon. He then pulled a bunch of magic crystals from his bag and gradually fused the two weapon fragments. As the magic crystals disintegrated into mana and flowed into the fragments, the magic arrays carved on them began to regenerate. Unlike the recasting process, fusing the fragments was simple. Players merely needed to supply enough mana. The process was a slow one, although there was almost no room for unforeseen complications. Time quickly passed. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. After 4 hours, the fusion process wasn't even halfway complete. What kind of weapon is this? Shi Feng's head ached as he watched the weapon fragments hungrily devour magic crystals. He had already spent 40,000 magic crystals over the past 4 hours, yet the fusion process hadn't even reached 50%. These weapon fragments were practically bottomless pits for mana. Fusing these weapon fragments would likely require enough magic crystals to bankrupt a second-rate guild. If he hadn't returned to the eastern continent with over 200,000 magic crystals, the equivalent of a full day's income for the Starlight Fortress, he wouldn't have had enough. Just as he was about to take more magic crystals from his bag, he received a call request from Gentle Snow. After so long apart, not only had Gentle Snow reached level 109, but she also now radiated a special kind of mana. Shi Feng would have assumed she had unlocked her mana body's full potential if he hadn't known better. He had to admit that he was impressed with her management of Stone Forest City while he had been gone. Not only had Gentle Snow perfected the city's defenses, but the guild also now had 130 Tier 3 experts. Zero Wing had already started raiding 100-man, level 100 team dungeons, and the guild's main force members had updated plenty of their weapons and equipment. Now, their equipment standards were only slightly weaker than the Hell Legion's experts. Guild leader, a group of dark players recently contacted me. They say they are from the dark world, and they wish to meet with you. Apparently, they wish to help us with our current predicament, Gentle Snow reported. Players from the dark world? Shi Feng was a little surprised to hear the news. The dark world was a very special otherworld in that it hadn't formed naturally. Rather, ancient gods had created the dark world, and it was dominated by the laws of darkness. The dark players that resided in this otherworld were a far greater threat than any dark players on the main continent. When the dark world had connected to the main continent during Shi Feng's previous life, the dark power's influence on the main continent had already reached its peak. Level 100+ neutral maps had become battlefields for dark and normal players, and many had fallen. Even some kingdoms and superpowers had been annihilated. However, before the planar gate between the dark world and the main continent had activated, no one had been able to leave the other world, other than the key holder. As far as Shi Feng could remember, only Flaming Light held the key, and it was obvious that he hadn't yet activated the planar gate. Yet, players acting as residents of the dark world were looking for him. He found the situation strange. Do you wish to meet them? Gentle Snow asked. This is interesting. Yes, I'll meet with them. Have someone receive them for now, and I'll head over once I've finished here, Shi Feng replied, gazing at the weapon fragments before him. All right, I'll inform them, Gentle Snow said, nodding before she disconnected the call. Shi Feng then returned his attention to fusing the two weapon fragments. 60,000, 80,000, 90,000. When he sacrificed the 100,000th magic crystal, he heard the chime of a system notification. System, fusion complete. Please begin recasting the weapon. With the system notification, Shi Feng heard the deafening roar of a dragon from the fused weapon fragments. It was so powerful and startling that he stumbled back. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Suddenly, space around him began to darken, and stars twinkled with dim light. A black dragon, over 800 meters tall, appeared before Shi Feng, and he instinctively froze under its gaze. The Black Dragon King? Shi Feng stared, astonished. This was undoubtedly the strongest dragon he had ever seen. The Tier 5 dragons he had seen in the past seemed like children before this monster. The scene didn't last long, however, and Shi Feng quickly found himself back in the quiet core room with only a tattered blade before him. Countless, night black particles circled the old weapon. System, you have 5 hours to recast the weapon before you. Attempt to recast a weapon fit for your use as much as possible. If the weapon's completion rate is lower than 70%, the recasting process will be deemed a failure. Chapter 2541, Blade Reshaping, 5 hours. Shi Feng's expression darkened when he read the system announcement. While 5 hours wasn't exactly a short time, it wasn't particularly long either. It might be enough time if he were recasting an ordinary weapon, but he had to recast a potential legendary weapon. Furthermore, if the completion rate wasn't high enough, the weapon's attributes could be severely affected. He might end up turning a peerless weapon into just another top-tier weapon. With the 5 hours the system had provided, he only had a very limited number of times he could attempt the recast as well. Recasting weapons in God's domain wasn't as complicated as creating one from scratch. Players only needed to reshape and refine the weapon. However, Sherfong didn't have a design to work with, so he would have to determine the new weapon's structure on his own. To make matters worse, he didn't know what materials the fragments had been forged with, which made it nearly impossible to take advantage of those materials' benefits. He'd have to work by trial and error, and achieving an ideal result would still be a major challenge. It seems I'll have to base the recast on the Abyssal Blade for now. Glancing at the system timer, Sherfong took a deep breath and activated the Philosopher's Hand, temporarily boosting himself to Advanced Master Forger. He then began to reshape the tattered blade into that of the Abyssal Blade. Any other player would find this task to be a nightmare and a disaster, but Sherfong, who had played God's domain for more than a decade now, was a different story. Although he had never touched upon the forging arts during his previous life, he was knowledgeable about them. He had spent time chatting with many master forgers about how to best recast a weapon in his past. Once mainstream players had reached level 120, recasting weapons had become a common matter for the various players. Many level 120+ dark gold weapons had been recast from epic weapons fragments, and once players collected all of the necessary fragments, they could recast them into an epic weapon once more. This had become one of the main sources of epic weapons for independent players. After innumerable recasts, players had discovered that one of the best ways to recast a weapon was to reshape it into one of the weapon fragment forms when they didn't know the original weapon structure. The weapon fragment's previous forms had been made with the involved materials in mind. Hence, it was highly likely that fragments had taken a form quite similar to that of the original weapon. All players needed to do was make some minor adjustments to the new weapon structure. Sherfong wasn't familiar with cruel darkness, so reforming the weapon in its form was out of the question. Fortunately, he was quite familiar with the Abyssal Blade, a weapon he had obtained not long after rejoining God's domain. In fact, he was more familiar with its form than his other weapons. Sherfong spent around 30 minutes reshaping the rough blade into something that highly resembled the Abyssal Blade, although this new weapon had a considerably longer blade. It couldn't even be considered a one-handed sword anymore, but a two-handed sword. Appraise. Sherfong began the appraisal, satisfied with his work, and as he did, the magic arrays covering the weapon activated, drinking in the ambient mana like a beast in the desert. The mana density around the long blade steadily rose. Sherfong watched, excitement blooming in his chest. He hadn't actually thought his first attempt would be a success. With this, making adjustments to the weapon would be much easier. However, not long after that thought, the system reported the appraisal results, and he wasn't sure whether he should laugh or cry when he saw them. System: weapon completion rate 40%. Do you wish to keep this outer shape? Even with only a 40% completion rate, the new Abyssal Blade could gather so much mana around it, and its aura had become incredibly powerful. He didn't even dare imagine how powerful the sword would be if he reached a 70% or higher completion rate. However, this new weapon's exterior was already ideal, and his results would be limited if he tried to modify it. Could the original be a two-handed weapon like Cruel Darkness? Sherfong felt another headache brew as he considered the thought. Although he could recast the weapon into a one- or two-handed sword, recasting a one-handed weapon would be considerably more difficult if the original had been a two-handed weapon. While swordsmen could use two-handed swords, Sherfong wasn't as familiar with that fighting style. Suddenly switching to a two-handed sword would severely impact his combat power. Yet, if he forcefully recast a two-handed weapon into a one-handed sword, he'd be abandoning some of the original materials. One-handed weapons required far fewer materials, after all. However, doing so would affect the weapon's completion rate. With fewer materials, the weapon wouldn't be as powerful as it once had been, and depending on the materials he abandoned, the weapon's composition could be at risk, causing disharmony between the materials. He'd have to take all of these factors into account when recasting this weapon into a one-handed sword. Normally, Only experienced Grandmaster Forgers could accomplish such feats. Not only did they have abundant experience, but they also possessed advanced skills that allowed them to discern the golden ratio among their materials. This was why Grandmaster Forgers could craft legendary items. After giving the matter some thought, Shi Feng decided to conduct some experiments. He initially sacrificed 10% of the weapon's materials, but it left too few remaining and the ratio was uncoordinated. The result was only a 23% completion rate, and the weapon was far weaker than the first recast. He had then sacrificed 20% of the materials, which was, again, too much, and as a result, the sword lacked strength. This time, the completion rate was a measly 16%. Shi Feng attempted the recasting 8 more times. Although each reshaping attempt took less time, he never earned more than a 60% completion rate. Even his best attempt had stopped at 58%, a long way from the required 70% completion rate. As he continued to reshape the weapon, time flew by. He paused when he had little over an hour remaining of the 5-hour time limit. Factoring in the time he'd need to refine the weapon, he didn't have much left for reshaping attempts. Do I really have to give up on recasting a one-handed sword? Shi Feng's mind was a jumble when he realized how little time remained. If he continued to aim for a one-handed sword, he wasn't likely to succeed in the time he had left. Ultimately, his recast would fail, and he'd have to search for more legendary materials to try again. Unfortunately, collecting a set of legendary materials with Zero Wing's current strength was a fool's dream. By the time Zero Wing managed to find them all, he would likely have found another weapon to suit him. However, even a high-quality two-handed sword would be useless to him, and he wouldn't likely have a chance to recast the final product into a one-handed sword again. He had only found a fragment of the Abyssal blade by chance. Who knew when he would come across another? Damn it. Abandoning 17% isn't enough, but 18% is too much. I don't have enough time for more precise experiments, either. Shi Feng could not help but hesitate as he watched time slip away. After multiple experiments, Shi Feng was certain that the golden ratio lay between 17% and 18%. He estimated that he'd need another 5 or 6 attempts to find the true golden ratio, but with only 1 hour left, he had time for, at most, 2 more reshaping attempts. It wouldn't be long before he'd have to refine the weapon. If he waited, the final product would be garbage, even if he reached a sufficient completion rate. I have no choice but to gamble, Shi Feng thought, gritting his teeth. He then retrieved the Ice Dragon's Claw he had obtained from the Ice Dragon Heathwaite and refined it. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Ice Dragon's Claw was a legendary material, and Heathwaite had only dropped 2. He had already used one to summon the Silver Dragon in the Starlight Fortress, which only left him with 1. He had been saving it to forge a customized epic weapon for one of his guildmates. Doing so would be quite easy, even without an epic weapon design, and if he had a design, he could forge a fragmented legendary weapon with the Ice Dragon's Claw. Since he couldn't verify the material's golden ratio, abandoning too many materials for the final product would be too complicated. Hence, he had no choice but to make up for the gap with the Ice Dragon's Claw. It took Shi Feng 10 minutes to refine the claw, transforming it into a dark blue crystal. He merged the crystal with the Abyssal blade, which added a white glow and a bone-chilling aura to the new weapon. Once the dark blue crystal had completely merged with the Abyssal blade, Shi Feng appraised the sword. Please succeed. Shi Feng silently prayed as he watched the system appraise the reshaped Abyssal blade. Chapter 2542, New Abyssal Blade. As the system began to appraise the weapon, the magic arrays on the new Abyssal Blade simultaneously lit up. Not only did these arrays illuminate the entire room, but they also gathered the room's mana around the weapon. The Abyssal Blade emitted another deafening dragon roar that echoed throughout the room. It was so powerful that Shi Feng stumbled away from the weapon, and the magic arrays around the room's walls brightened, creating an additional barrier. The roar shook the dual-layered barrier violently, and it seemed as if the barrier would shatter at any second. As the roar faded, peace returned to the room. Following which, a chill swept through the room, and even Shi Feng, who had very high magic resistance, shuddered in the cold air. He felt as if he were standing in an icy tundra, and he could feel his body begin to freeze. What powerful mana! When Sherfong looked back at the new Abyssal blade, the origin of the chill, he could sense that it was only an effect of the weapon's magic arrays triggering. If even the automatically triggered arrays produced such a result, they'd reach a whole new level of power under his control. Before he could get a better feel of the new weapon's power, however, the arrays suddenly went dormant, and the room quickly returned to normal. System: weapon completion rate 86%. Do you wish to keep this outer shape? 86%? Sherfong stared at the system notification in astonishment. He hadn't actually believed that his gamble would pay off, and in spades, at that. The resulting completion rate was 16% higher than the base requirement, which completely exceeded his expectations. Once a weapon's completion rate reached the standard in God's domain, a higher percentage would yield hardly any bonuses to the displayed attributes. Rather, it would improve the weapon's hidden effects. Naturally, the higher the completion rate, the stronger the hidden effects would become. An 86% completion rate was by no means a low value. Less than 10% of God's domain's weapons had an 80% or higher completion rate, with most hovering around the 75% threshold. Only 1% of all weapons in the game had an 85% or higher completion rate. And according to Sherfang's knowledge, the highest completion rate ever achieved when crafting a weapon was 94%. He had heard that the epic weapon's performance even rivaled a fragmented legendary weapon. Sherfong didn't even dare to dream of forging a weapon with a 90% completion rate. Only Grandmaster Forgers were capable of such a feat. He was merely an intermediate Master Forger and had only reached advanced Master rank due to the Philosopher's Hand. He had never expected to achieve an 86% completion rate. He immediately chose to keep the shape, and as he confirmed his decision, the new Abyssal blade gently landed on the central platform. Amazing! So, this is the power of the merged fragments. Surprise flashed in Sherfang's eyes as he took up the new Abyssal blade. The old and new Abyssal blades looked roughly the same on the outside, but the new weapon was much heavier than the old one. However, despite the increased weight, Sherfong felt far more compatible with this weapon than he ever had with the hilt in his hand. It felt as if the sword were an extension of his body. He could even feel the ambient mana flow through the weapon. With the new Abyssal blade in his hand, his mana sensitivity underwent a qualitative transformation. He wasn't a magical class player, and his mana sensitivity couldn't compare to theirs. Mana sensitivity might not be particularly useful for physical players, but it was useful to experts, especially those who were adept at manipulating magic arrays. Not only could players control magic arrays far more easily with greater mana sensitivity, but they could also locate arrays' weak points with less effort. Moreover, once one's mana sensitivity reached a certain level, players could shatter their opponent's skill or spell by manipulating the flow of mana in the air. They could even prevent opponents from using skills or spells at all. System: you have 30 minutes remaining. Please complete the recasting process as soon as possible. If the process fails, the weapon will disintegrate. Too close. I nearly ran out of time. Sherfong breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the system notification, and he started to refine the new weapon. The refining process was much simpler than the reshaping process. He merely needed to add the blade's edge and polish the sword's magic arrays. As both an intermediate master magician and a temporary advanced master forger, these were simple tasks for him. He completed the process in less than 20 minutes. The instant Sherfong finished the new weapon, he heard the sound of another system notification. System: weapon recasting successful. Please name your new weapon. Abyssal blade, Sherfong replied without hesitation. System: naming successful. Recast weapon will be named the Abyssal blade. Do you wish to activate auto appraisal? Appraise. Sherfong answered. Letting the system appraise the weapon might not mean much to ordinary players, but to Sherfong, a master forger, it was a relatively useful tool that would grant him some forging proficiency. In fact, master forgers during his previous life had sometimes taken recasting commissions for free to gain more forging proficiency. As long as they were successful, The forger responsible would be awarded an abundance of proficiency. A master forger might save 1 or 2 days of work with one successfully recast weapon. System: appraisal of the Abyssal blade is complete. Weapon completion rate is at 86%. Weapon rank is designated as Fragmented Legendary, rewarding 30,000 forging proficiency. The notification stunned Sherfong. Wonderful! It's upgraded to Fragmented Legendary rank. Sherfong looked at his new weapon, ecstatic. Although he had guessed that there was a high possibility of the end product reaching Fragmented Legendary rank, he couldn't help his joy after hearing his guess verified. A Fragmented Legendary weapon. He had quite a few Fragmented Legendary items on him, but none were weapons. They were only equipment pieces and accessories. The increased combat power they could provide was nowhere near that of a Fragmented Legendary weapon, and although he had been thinking of hunting one down for himself, acquiring such a weapon was easier said than done. Furthermore, he would have to find a compatible one-handed sword. Now that he finally had a Fragmented Legendary weapon that suited him perfectly, why wouldn't he be excited? Sherfong immediately called up the Abyssal Blade's attribute panel. Normally, recasting a weapon significantly changed the weapon's attributes. The new weapon would no longer be what it once had been. Abyssal Blade, one-handed sword, magic weapon, Fragmented Legendary rank, equipment requirement, strength 3000, agility 2000, attack power, 210% of strength attribute, attack speed, 2% of agility attribute, all attributes, increases according to user's level, ignore levels plus 35 attacks have 70% chance to cause 250% damage, 40% chance to cause 300% damage. Every attack increases damage by 2% to a maximum of 30%. When equipped, strength increased by 50%, agility increased by 50%, intelligence increased by 35%, endurance increased by 50%, attack speed increased by 50%, all effects of weapon-related skills increased by 20%, all item level requirements reduced by 10 levels. If wielder belongs to a swordsman-related class, all skill levels plus 6. Increase free ability points received for every increase in level by 2 points. Equipment Tier 3. Can be evolved. Devour 4 God Crystals to evolve to Tier 4. Additional active skill 1. Darkness Bind, Tier 3. Binds all enemies within a 100-yard radius for 3 seconds and reduces their defense and magic resistance by 100% for 15 seconds cooldown. 40 seconds additional active skill 2, Darkness Domain, Tier 3. Converts an area of 200 yards around the user into a darkness domain. Weakens the senses of all enemies within the darkness domain and reduces enemies' basic attributes by 15%. While inside the darkness domain, the user may control up to 36 strands of power of darkness. Each strand carries force equivalent to 110% of the user's strength and causes 100% darkness damage. Duration, 60 seconds cooldown. 8 minutes additional passive Profound Inheritance. Mana Abyss, Tier 3. The higher the density of the mana surrounding the Abyssal Blade, the more power the weapon will exhibit. Power of the weapon can be increased up to 100%. Additional active Profound Inheritance, Black Dragon's Soul, Tier 3. Grants the user the Black Dragon King's soul and transforms the user into the Black Dragon King. The higher the density of the surrounding mana, the higher the Black Dragon King's life rating will be. Can use the skill, Dragon Breath. Duration, 10 minutes cooldown, 12 hours. A sword recast from the fragments of an ancient, unknown weapon. The Black Dragon King's power has been sealed within the sword, although the Black Dragon King has cursed the weapon. Beyond the immense strength the blade offers, the wielder must face a backlash after a certain amount of time. If the wielder cannot suppress the backlash, the wielder will receive the Black Dragon King's curse, permanently reducing all attributes by 70%. Unable to be dropped. Unable to be traded. Unable to be destroyed. So strong. Not even Fire Dance's 1,000 transformations can compare to this. The new Abyssal Blade's attributes left Sherfong flabbergasted. With such attributes, doesn't this sword nearly rival legendary weapons? The new Abyssal Blade was like a combination of the old Abyssal Blade and Cruel Darkness. Even top-tier fragmented legendary weapons were likely weaker than the sword. When Sherfeng wielded the Abyssal Blade, he felt that he could display Tier 4 power with a normal attack, even without using a mana technique. I had been worried about getting to Solomon's Sword's fragments in Poison City, but with this, that shouldn't be a problem. Poison City was a level 120 secret land, and although it might be a challenge, even with his new weapon and the Hell Legion's help, it was no longer impossible. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. UA level 120 secret land. If level 100 team dungeons were a place for players to adapt to Tier 3, level 120 secret lands were treasure troves for Tier 3 experts. Within these secret lands, players could find ancient inheritances, including Tier 3 skill and spell books, as well as ancient potions that could help players unlock their mana body's potential. By the time Shadow had grown strong enough to raid level 120 secret lands during Sherfeng's previous life, the various superpowers had long since swept through them, leaving only scraps for ordinary powers. If Zero Wing could start raiding level 120 secret lands now, the guild's ability to nurture Tier 3 players and help them unlock their mana body's potential would definitely surpass that of the various superpowers. His guild would become a true titan in God's domain. Now that my weapon is complete, it's time to meet with the players from the Dark World. Sherfeng sheathed the new Abyssal Blade and left the underground core room. Chapter 2543, Determining Fate with Words. Stone Forest City, Zero Wing's residence. As Sherfeng parted the doors to the guild hall's top-floor reception room, he felt two sharp auras locking onto him, which kept track of his every move. The two who radiated these auras definitely had domain realm combat standards. When Sherfeng glanced into the room, he spotted three people. The two people that accompanied Gentle Snow were a man and a woman, both of whom radiated such dense darkness energy that it took on tangible form. Even players who normally couldn't sense darkness energy could see a layer of black fog around the two players. The woman looked like she was in her early 30s and was a rare Dark Knight class. She was also a member of the rarer Dark Wolfkin race. Her aura was only slightly weaker than Gentle Snow's, who wore a piece of fragmented legendary equipment. The elderly man beside her garbed himself in pitch-black robes and held a black staff. He had long, pointed ears and tainted the room's mana with an icy, dark aura. Ordinary Tier 2 magical class experts would find the mana here difficult to manipulate. A fallen half-elf? A hint of surprise flashed in Sherfeng's eyes. Mana loved the elven race, and they were born with an extraordinary affinity for manipulating it. However, God's domain had a group of elves that had fallen to darkness in pursuit of mana's limits. They were known as fallen elves, and all natural elves relentlessly hunted them down. Fallen elves were unusual in God's domain, and players that successfully converted to the fallen half-elf race were even rarer. Of course, any superpower would target a fallen half-elf for recruitment. Fallen half-elves had an even stronger affinity for mana than ordinary half-elves, and their affinity for and control over the power of darkness was especially impressive. They could practically rival pure elves. Elves might not compare to dragons, but they were one of the top races in God's domain with far greater growth potential than human players. By becoming a fallen half-elf, one would have the growth potential to rival true elves, and after Tier 3, each subsequent tier would grant a fallen half-elf a qualitative boost to their strength. Furthermore, any player that converted into a fallen half-elf proved they had very high combat standards. As long as they received enough resources, they were almost guaranteed to reach Tier 5. With the race's natural talents, no one would be able to take down a Tier 5 fallen half-elf player outside of Tier 6 God-ranked experts. As far as Sherfeng could remember, players only had a chance of completing the trial to become a fallen half-elf after they had unlocked their mana body's full potential, yet this elderly guest of his hadn't and had still successfully converted. Allow me to introduce you, Guild Leader. These experts from two of the Dark World's top 3 guilds. They've come to discuss the issue of Demon's Heart with Zero Wing, Gentle Snow announced as Sherfeng entered the room. The Dark World was incredibly vast, roughly as large as 3 ordinary empires. The other world was even larger than the Fire Dragon Empire, one of God's domain's 4 great empires. 3 guilds ruled over the Dark World: Dark Rhapsody, Deity Society, and World Domination. They had all received support from major corporations during the game's early stages and had secretly poached quite a few experts from the various super first-rate guilds and super guilds. Since then, these 3 guilds had been steadily developing their strength in the Dark World, and now, each could rival a super guild. Zero Wing's 2 current guests were representatives from Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society. Seeing that you've come without warning, I'm assuming you're in quite a rush. Please, just speak your mind, Shifeng addressed the 2 players before him. He had a rough understanding of Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society. Although they hadn't been powerful enough to rank as 2 of the 6 great dark guilds in the past, they had still been strong enough to rival super guilds. When the main continent and the Dark World had connected, the 2 guilds had each annihilated a superpower, using the victories as stepping stones to secure a foothold on the main continent. These 2 guilds' strength could not be underestimated. You are just as straightforward as the rumors say, Guild Leader Black Flame, the female Dark Knight said, smiling. This trip hasn't been an easy one, so let's be forthright. Elder Gold and I are here on behalf of our respective guilds, and we hope to sign a contract with Zero Wing. A contract? Regarding what? Shifeng asked. I'm afraid you still don't realize how terrifying Demon's Heart can be, Guild Leader Black Flame, particularly its Vice Guild Leader, Flaming Light. He holds the key to activate the passage between the Dark World and the main continent. After the humiliation the guild suffered at your hands, he's almost guaranteed to use it in the Cold Spring Forest. All of the Dark World's players will swarm the area, and Stone Forest City isn't likely to survive the coming storm, the fallen half-elf, whom the female Dark Knight had referred to as Elder Gold, said. However, our guilds don't wish to serve as Flaming Light's hired thugs, and as such, we have come to negotiate with Zero Wing. That's right. The contract we have in mind is very simple. If the passage to the Dark World opens in Cold Spring Forest, our guilds will not take any action against Zero Wing or Stone Forest City, the female Dark Knight continued, chuckling. I'm sure this will alleviate a considerable amount of pressure your guild and city will face. How you depend on the rest of the Dark World's denizens will depend on you, Guild Leader Black Flame. And what do you want in return? Shifeng asked. The 2 dark guilds' proposal didn't surprise Shifeng in the slightest. Demon's Heart might have some influence in the Dark World, but it was nothing compared to the other world's top 3 guilds. It was now obvious that Demon's Heart intended to use the Dark World as its spearhead, and some of the Dark World's players weren't happy about playing that role. They would have to expend their resources to fight the main continent's powers, yet only Demon's Heart would gain an advantage. Hence, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society had come in search of a partnership with Zero Wing, which owned a guild city in Cold Spring Forest. It is nothing significant. We merely wish to discuss the allocation of Cold Spring Forest's resources, Guild Leader Black Flame, Elder Gold said. Both of our guilds are large organizations, and we require an extraordinary amount of resources. In exchange for our neutrality, we'd like half of Cold Spring Forest's resource areas. We will not interfere in any matters in the other half. Naturally, we would like Zero Wing to agree to the same. Call it a non-interference pact. Gentle Snow couldn't help but frown from beside Shifeng. At first glance, the conditions Elder Gold had stated were generous. Cold Spring Forest was an abundant resource map, after all, and not even Zero Wing could monopolize it. However, if Zero Wing signed this contract, the guild wouldn't have to battle the rest of the Dark World's powers and players for the remaining half of the map. This would undoubtedly intensify the competition. In contrast, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society could avoid a fight with Zero Wing, their largest competitor in the Cold Spring Forest. I see, Shifeng said, nodding. This proposal will benefit each of our 3 guilds. May I know your thoughts on this, Guild Leader Black Flame? The Dark Knight asked. Since your 2 guilds are so sincere, how about this? Zero Wing will concede 70% of Cold Spring Forest's resource spots. In exchange, your guilds will offer us some other resources. We don't want much, 500,000 darkness crystals will do. What do you think? Shi Feng countered with a smile. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, guild leader? Gentle Snow exclaimed, turning to Shi Feng with wide, shocked eyes. Competing with the Dark World's various powers over half of the Cold Spring Forest's resources would already be an immense challenge. If they only had 30% to fight over, the Dark World's powers would immediately declare an all-out war against their guild. Shi Feng's counteroffer even confused the female Dark Knight and Elder Gold, not to mention Gentle Snow. They had considered the possibility that their offer would be rejected before they had visited Zero Wing's residence, or that Zero Wing would try to minimize the amount of resources it would share with their guilds. They had discussed various countermeasures for these possibilities. In fact, they had planned for several days of negotiation with the guild. However, they had never dreamed that Zero Wing would offer even more of Cold Spring Forest's resources. What, exactly, was this man thinking? Chapter 2544, Crazy Black Flame? The female Dark Knight and Elder Gold were both dazed for a long moment after hearing Shi Feng's counteroffer, and they even wondered if he were joking with them. With their original offer, in which Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society claimed 50% of Cold Spring Forest's resource areas, the rest of the Dark World's powers would have to battle Zero Wing for the remaining half. Even if the Dark World's various powers tried to avoid it, they would come into conflict with Zero Wing. With so many players vying for such limited resources, a blood fight was inevitable. Unfortunately, the Dark World's powers couldn't afford to search for other level 100 neutral maps for their development. At least, it wasn't something they could afford before the Dark World's players had expanded their influence on the main continent. This was precisely why the various superpowers were so afraid of Demon's Heart's flaming light. And yet, Shi Feng had just offered another 20% of Cold Spring Forest's resources. It was insane and suicidal. His counteroffer might seem wise to ordinary people, as doing so would allow Zero Wing to tighten its defensive line and secure better control over its resource areas, but Dark players would have no choice but to fight for those resources spots. None of the Otherworld's players would dare go against Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society. If the two guilds controlled more of the Cold Spring Forest, even more Dark players would have to fight Zero Wing for resources. Zero Wing's very survival in the map would be in question, not to mention obtaining resources in Cold Spring Forest. Has he given up on Stone Forest City? It was the only possibility the female Dark Knight could think of. Zero Wing wasn't about to face one or two superpowers, but an entire otherworld. Moreover, it was an otherworld with even more players than the Fire Dragon Empire, and not a single power could stand against such a force. Realizing this, Shi Feng must have decided to abandon Cold Spring Forest's resources in exchange for the Dark World's precious darkness crystals. It was a worthwhile transaction, but no normal person would accept such an exchange. Developing a guild city required a massive amount of time and resources. Not just anyone could afford to abandon an entire guild city without a second thought. Are you serious, Guild Leader Black Flame? Elder Gold asked. He could not think of a single reason to refuse Shi Feng's offer. Although 500,000 darkness crystals were valuable, they were insignificant compared to 70% of Cold Spring Forest's resource areas. Of course. If you don't believe me, I'll sign the contract right now, Shi Feng replied, chuckling. Excellent. I agree to your offer on behalf of Deity Society. Elder Gold exclaimed, excitement glowing in his eyes. Only a fool would refuse. Throughout Cold Spring Forest, only Zero Wing could pose a threat to Deity Society. The other powers were not worth mentioning. If Zero Wing were willing to part with an additional 20% of the map's resource spots, Deity Society wouldn't have to worry about managing more territory. What about Dark Rhapsody? Shi Feng asked as he turned toward the female Dark Knight. On behalf of my guild, I have no issues with this arrangement either, the Dark Knight answered without hesitation. Although she didn't know what this swordsman was thinking, her superiors would strangle her once she returned if she refused. Once Elder Gold and the female Dark Knight had agreed, the three players signed the contract stipulating that Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society would occupy 70% of Cold Spring Forest's resource areas, while Zero Wing would occupy the remainder. None of the three guilds would interfere in each other's matters, and the two dark guilds would provide a total of 500,000 darkness crystals. With the negotiations complete, Elder Gold and the female Dark Knight promptly returned to the Dark World to notify their guilds of the good news. They immediately began to prepare the 500,000 darkness crystals Shi Feng had demanded as well. Once the portal connecting the Dark World to the main continent opened in Cold Spring Forest, Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society would hand the crystals over to Zero Wing. When the news hit Dark Rhapsody's and Deity Society's main headquarters, the two guilds' upper echelons were astonished. I had never expected Zero Wing to be so daring. It seems it's quite confident of safeguarding its 30% of the map. But how can that be? Zero Wing must realize that it cannot stop the Dark World's advance. It must be aiming for the next best option. I suspect the guild's decisive nature is the reason it has achieved the success it enjoys today. Don't forget, Zero Wing's enemies aren't limited to those in the Dark World. Demon's Heart is still lurking, and Zero Wing must think this agreement will help it stand against the Dark Guild. Heated discussions erupted among the two guilds' upper echelons over their new contracts with Zero Wing. None of them had expected this outcome, but regardless, it was good news for both of their guilds. While Dark Rhapsodies and Deity Societies spoke of the matter, news quickly reached Demon's Heart. Black Flame is quite bold, Elder Heart. It seems he intends to give up Cold Spring Forest resources and focus his forces on protecting Stone Forest City, a level 108, Tier 3 Demon Viscount Shield Warrior commented, grinning at Furious Heart. Shi Feng had so arrogantly strutted through Demon City, and now, because of Flaming Light's single move, his guild was forced to part with 70% of its resource areas in Cold Spring Forest. It was a joyous outcome for Demon's Heart. Did he think he'd get off scot-free after provoking Demon's Heart? Furious Heart said, snorting. If he thinks he can protect Stone Forest City by handing over 70% of Cold Spring Forest's resource spots, he should think again. He simply doesn't know how futile his actions are. Vice Guild leader Light has already reached an agreement with several superpowers. When the time comes, Demon's Heart and the various superpowers will attack Stone Forest City from both within and without. We'll tear the city asunder and ensure that Zero Wing never again has a place in Cold Spring Forest. Demon's Heart's other elders excitedly expressed their agreement. Zero Wing might assume its only opponents were from the Dark World, but in truth, the guild would have to face several superpowers as well. Under their combined assault, Zero Wing would be as powerless as an ant. It had no chance of survival. Stone Forest City, Zero Wing's residence. While many superpowers gossiped about the agreement between Zero Wing, Dark Rhapsody, and Deity Society, Gentle Snow, confused, followed Shi Feng to the guild warehouse on the residence's first underground floor. Guild leader, offering an additional 20% isn't worth just 500,000 darkness crystals. Cold Spring Forest Cold Spring Water is a huge help to Tier 2 players' development. It is the reason so many of our Tier 2 experts can work in level 100 neutral maps. Giving away so much of Cold Spring Forest will drastically reduce our Tier 2 members' development speed, Gentle Snow complained. She felt that Shi Feng had gone too far this time. Even God's Domain's various superpowers fought like crazy over Cold Spring Water, and due to its rarity, the competition was incredibly intense. Fortunately, with Stone Forest City, Zero Wing had an absolute advantage in the competition for Cold Spring Water from Cold Spring Forest, and thus, no powers dared to cause trouble for the guild. This item allowed Zero Wing's Tier 2 members to level rapidly and reach level 105 far sooner than others. Once they reached that level and equipped level 105 top-tier equipment, these Tier 2 members could challenge their Tier 3 promotion quests, clearing them with relatively high success rates. As a result, Zero Wing continuously nurtured more Tier 3 players. If they gave away 70% of Cold Spring Forest's resource areas and had to compete with the Dark World's players over the remainder, Zero Wing would likely have to abandon Cold Spring Forest entirely. Meanwhile, Darkness crystals were an attributed magic crystal, And while they were valuable, that was only true for dark players due to the darkness energy they contained. Darkness energy wasn't helpful to regular players in the least. In fact, to regular players, 500,000 darkness crystals weren't even worth 500,000 magic crystals. I understand, but Cold Spring Forest is massive. Zero Wing isn't even large enough to exploit 20% of the map's resource areas, much less 50%. Rather than holding useless territory, shouldn't we exchange it for something of value? Shifeng asked, chuckling. But those Dark World players, Gentle Snow understood what Shifeng was trying to say. At this point, only Tier 3 players could freely roam level 100 neutral maps for long periods. Tier 2 players couldn't last for very long in such areas. Zero Wing's current forces simply weren't enough to occupy all of Cold Spring Forest's resource areas. Selling the additional spots was a wise decision, but if they considered the Dark World's powers and players, it'd be a completely different story. The Dark World's players are a problem, but only if they actually pose a threat to Zero Wing in Cold Spring Forest. Shifeng said, chuckling. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. You, guild leader, were talking about the Dark World. I spoke with our guests earlier, and those two informed me that the Dark World is as large as 3 of the main continent's ordinary empires. The other world has even more players than the Fire Dragon Empire. We'll be facing a minimum of 20,000 Tier 3 experts, Gentle Snow continued, flashing Shifeng a bitter smile. And what if we have 2,000 or 3,000 fully armed, Tier 3 NPCs? Shifeng asked, smiling. Are you talking about the Night Division? Gentle Snow, more or less, realized where Shifeng was going with this. We still don't have the funds to upgrade them. Who said that? Shifeng quipped. He then opened his epic spatial bag and emptied its contents inside the guild warehouse. Within a few dozen seconds, materials filled the expansive warehouse, and everyone was rare. Gentle Snow hadn't even seen many of these materials before. As the items tumbled out of Shifeng's bag, the mana density in the warehouse rose significantly. Chapter 2545, Astonishing Wealth. Gentle Snow stared at the materials Shifeng had revealed in a daze. As a vice guild leader, she had done extensive research on God's Domain's materials, yet she didn't even recognize half of the items Shifeng had dumped in the warehouse. Even though she recognized were considered precious on the market, and normally, they were impossible to purchase, even for absurdly high prices. And yet, their guild warehouse was now packed full of such materials. The warehouses in Zero Wing's residences were easily as large as 4 basketball courts, but despite its size, Shifeng had filled it with incredibly valuable materials. They could rake in unimaginable profits if they sold them all. Guild leader, did you acquire all of these materials from the Western continent? Gentle Snow asked. She was aware of his visit to the West, but since the guild had still needed management personnel, she had decided to stay behind. However, Shifeng hadn't spent long in the West, and even though he had left with millions of magic crystals, returning with such a bounty shouldn't be possible in such a short time. Rare materials were considered rare for a reason. There wasn't exactly a large supply of them on the market. To acquire as many materials as Shifeng had, one would have to sweep through multiple kingdoms and empires' auction houses. Moreover, once the various powers discovered that someone was purchasing certain rare materials in bulk, prices would skyrocket. To avoid that outcome, most purchased materials in small quantities over a long time. Mitchum, we spent quite a long time collecting these materials, Shifeng said, nodding. Smiling, he continued, how about it? Do you think dealing with those Dark World players will still be a problem? He had known about Demon's Heart's trump card for a long time. Before his visit to the Western continent, he never would have casually attacked the Dark Guild. He didn't want to become the entire world's enemy, after all. But times had changed, and he was now extremely wealthy. Magic crystals were worth far more on the Western continent than they were in the East. Hence, he had gotten a bigger bang for his buck. He estimated that the materials he had purchased for 3 million magic crystals in the West should fetch around 10 million gold in the East. At this stage of the game, not even superpowers could collect 10 million gold. At best, they might have 1 or 2 million to spare. You are really vicious, guild leader. I can't believe you got your hands on so many materials unique to the Western continent. The various superpowers would go mad if they found out about this, Gentle Snow said, excitement welling within her as Sherfong nodded victoriously. In God's domain, money was power. Whether one was trying to construct a guild city or provide their guild members more benefits, all required money. Hence, a rich guild could develop rapidly. Unfortunately, not only was God's domain's coin production limited, but players also had to cover many daily expenses. Even now, as players reached Tier 3, coins hadn't depreciated much, and there were even faint signs of them becoming more valuable. Now that Zero Wing had such a fortune, fully arming its Night Division and forming a true NPC army was entirely possible. I do have an important use for these materials, however. We can only sell half. I'll leave that to you. Make sure to find absolutely trustworthy people to do the job. If this news leaks, we'll have a hard time demanding high prices, Sherfong warned her. I understand. I ensure that every one of these items sells at an ideal price, and I'll make sure that none of the various superpowers learn of our wealth, Gentle Snow promised with a bright smile. She couldn't help but look forward to seeing the various superpowers' expressions when they saw Zero Wing's upgraded Night Division. Since Stone Forest City's relocation to Cold Spring Forest, many superpowers had been eyeing the city. As they gained more Tier 3 players, Zero Wing's control in the map had weakened, and due to the recent conflict with Demon's Heart, quite a few powers have started to cause trouble. At this rate, the various powers might assume they could fight Zero Wing for Cold Spring Forest's resource areas before the portal to the Dark World even activated. I'll leave everything to you then, Sherfong said, nodding. Following which, Sherfong stealthily made his way to Stone Forest City's candlelight trading firm. While one of his goals in visiting the Western continent had been to earn a ton of money and materials, his main goal had been for the Tree of Life. The Tree of Life was only a tool, not a weapon, yet all powers sought the treasure. This was because the Tree of Life could produce a variety of rare items, not unlike an infinite treasure trove. Even super guilds would go crazy to obtain a Tree of Life main branch since they could produce Fruits of Life, a legendary material that could resurrect the dead. A single fruit could even grant creatures new life. Most players might not care about the ability to resurrect the dead, but countless dreamed of the ability to grant living creatures new life. Granting new life meant upgrading a creature's growth potential and life rating, which could be done to players, monsters, and NPCs. Moreover, there was almost no limit to the number of fruits of life an individual could consume, although each subsequent fruit would prove less effective. This ability was why Fruits of Life were the best cultivation fruit in God's domain. The main branch Sherfong had obtained had survived since before the Great Destruction. One could only imagine how valuable it was. Stone Forest City, candlelight trading firm. Due to how attractive Stone Forest City was to Tier 3 players and the fact that the candlelight trading firm sold all sorts of master potions, the shop had become a hub for the various adventurer teams. In fact, any adventurer team wishing to develop in Stone Forest City first became an advanced member in Candlelight. Plenty of lifestyle players visited the trading firm as well. To keep up with the huge demand, Candlelight had split a portion of its basic orders with independent lifestyle players, while allowing Candlelight's members to focus on producing the more important products. Not only did this increase the trading firm's operation scale, but it also increased productivity. At the same time, it also allowed independent players a chance to earn proficiency points while practicing their crafts. The independent lifestyle players that worked for Candlelight could also earn contribution points and exchange them for a plethora of recipes and materials. They could even spend points to rent special workshops and basic meditation rooms. Due to such lucrative benefits, many independent lifestyle players with high standards had decided to develop in Stone Forest City. When Sherfong entered the candlelight trading firm, he found that the first-floor hall was practically full of adventurer team players and lifestyle players. The trading firm was no less popular than auction houses in NPC cities. Sherfong quickly made his way to one of the firm's basic meditation rooms, making many lifestyle players, who were waiting to rent a special workshop or basic meditation room, jealous. Who is that guy? They're just letting him enter a mediation room without waiting in line. I don't know, but he must be someone important. I've heard that only Candlelight's core members and independent players with a gold membership can enter mediation rooms as they wish. I wonder when I'll be able to become a gold member. Gold? You should thank your lucky stars if you even become a silver member. You know that even master lifestyle players only become bronze members. All lifestyle players dreamed of using basic meditation rooms due to their excellent training environments, but even the various superpowers lifestyle players had few opportunities to use them. The only reason that independent players like them had a chance to use a basic meditation room was Candlelight's booming popularity. If they could use the rooms whenever they wanted, they wouldn't have any trouble improving their skills. Of course, Feng ignored these independent players' jealousy. He merely entered the basic meditation room and retrieved the Tree of Life's main branch he had collected from the guild warehouse. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Mana was the core of all in God's domain. Players would obtain better results in both combat training and producing items in higher mana density environments. Thus, to increase his chances of restoring the main branch, he had deliberately shut himself in a basic meditation room. With the main branch in hand, Feng carefully pulled a brightly glowing crystal from his bag. The instant it touched the air, it illuminated the room, and he felt the crystal radiate warmth. This crystal was none other than the Star of Light, a legendary material he had obtained from the demon god's temptation. This should be enough mana. I just hope it can live. Feng nervously gulped as he merged the Star of Light and Tree of Life's main branch. Chapter 2546, Divine Artifact? When Feng merged the Star of Light with the withered branch, the mana inside the basic meditation room started gathering rapidly around the branch. In less than 3 seconds, a layer of white mist had formed around the withered branch. Moreover, this still wasn't the end of it. Afterward, the mana mist started condensing into drops of liquid mana on the branch and the area around it. Subsequently, the liquid mana flowed toward and into the branch's broken end. And with each drop of liquid mana that entered the withered branch, the branch quivered, giving off ripples of energy, as if some kind of creature was awakening. It seems the results are quite good. Feng grew elated when he sensed the ripples of energy from the withered branch. Previously, when he saw that the withered rate of the branch had reached 94%, he had somewhat despaired of reviving the branch already. Fortunately, there was no failure when trying to revive a Tree of Life's branch. One merely needed to provide it with a continuous supply of high-density mana and life energy. So long as that condition was met in sufficient quantity, the branch would grow into another Tree of Life. The only problem was that the quantity and density of mana and life energy required would vary depending on a branch's withered rate. Meanwhile, the materials capable of supplementing the mana and life energy that a 94% withered main branch required were incredibly rare. Fortunately, Feng had been lucky on his trip to the Western continent this time and secured himself a Star of Light. Without it, he really wouldn't have any hope of resuscitating the withered branch he had. Following which, time passed by rapidly. Before he knew it, 8 hours had passed already. During this period, the withered branch had continuously condensed and absorbed liquid mana. Combined with the Star of Light's essence, the branch was now brimming with life energy. In fact, it had even started leafing. As green leaves kept sprouting on the branch, the life energy it radiated grew denser. Now, the entire room was brimming with life. It just awoke, yet the life energy it's giving off is already so dense? What is the rank of this Tree of Life? Feng was a little surprised when he sensed the life energy filling the room. If players rest in this room, their recovery rate will most likely more than double. In God's domain, even after players reach Tier 3, they still wouldn't be immune to the corrosive energies in level 100+ maps. They would merely be more resistant to these energies. After the corruption reached a certain point, they would still have to return to cities to rest. Otherwise, they would collapse from hunger or exhaustion or simply outright die. This was also the reason behind Stone Forest City's rapid development. However, even if players returned to a city to rest, they would still take a very long time to recover to their peak. While wealthy players also had the option of consuming mana-rich food and beverages to accelerate their recovery, these only improved the recovery rate by a few dozen%. If players rested inside this room, however, their recovery rate would increase by at least 100%. This was simply incredible. After all, expert players of God's Domain consumed food and beverages that accelerated their recovery rate on a regular basis, to have more time grinding and exploring. Those of guild upper echelons would even take ancient potions to increase their recovery rate, which was extremely expensive. The cheaper ones cost around 20 or 30 gold per bottle, while expensive ones cost over 100 gold. Ancient potions were all consumables whose effects lasted only 4 to 6 hours. However, combining the effects of ancient potions and food that boosted recovery rate could just barely double players' recovery rate. Now, however, a Tree of Life's branch that had just been revived could grant this effect merely by being present inside a room. If news of this spread, the various powers of God's Domain would definitely go crazy with envy. After all, an ancient potion granted its effects to only one person. The Tree of Life's branch, however, could aid all the players resting inside the room it was in. Setting all else aside, this branch alone would already give Zero Wing's main force members a huge lead over the various superpowers experts when it came to leveling up and improving their strength. Meanwhile, as Sherfong was reeling in astonishment from the passive effects the Tree of Life's main branch displayed, the branch in question suddenly released an emerald glow. It then transformed into a sapling. The instant the sapling took shape, Sherfong felt an indescribably heavy pressure on him. The sapling had actually sucked the basic meditation room dry of mana. If not for Sherfong having fully unlocked his mana body, the sapling's action would have most likely killed him. Unable to hold back his curiosity, Sherfong promptly called out the sapling's attribute panel. It's actually a divine artifact. Sherfong was stunned when he saw the statistics displayed before him. Ancient Tree of Life's sapling. Fragmented divine artifact rank. A sapling brimming with life energy. The sapling also contains a trace of the world's aura before the Great Destruction. This sapling is capable of producing 17 drops of water of life daily, 3 nuclei of life every 3 days, and 1 fruit of life every 7 days. This sapling can survive only in places with high mana density. Capable of growth. Requires a large amount of dense and pure energy to grow. Current growth rate 0%. Previously, he had merely speculated that the branch he obtained was a divine artifact because it had existed since ancient times, and the environment in ancient times was many times better than the environment in the current God's Domain. However, he never thought that the main branch would actually turn out to be a divine artifact. Although it was a fragmented one, it was still a bona fide divine artifact. It wasn't some powerful legendary item labeled as a divine artifact. Divine artifacts could bring entire races to prosperity. They were existences that even ancient gods would fight tooth and nail for. Even the almighty war god's temple had only 2 divine artifacts in its warehouse. If news of this sapling got out, let alone players, even the NPC powers of God's Domain would most likely take action, particularly the dark powers, which would definitely destroy Stone Forest City. In fact, they wouldn't mind drowning an entire empire in flames to get their hands on this sapling. Hence, while Sherfong was indeed ecstatic to see that the sapling turned out to be a fragmented divine artifact, his emotions were complicated as he looked at the sapling. Moreover, resuscitating a Tree of Life's branch wasn't the most difficult part about growing a Tree of Life. After all, so long as players found the right materials to supply the branch with mana and life energy, they would be able to revive it. Even if players didn't get the right materials on their first attempt, they could simply try again and eventually succeed. The truly challenging part of growing a Tree of Life was keeping it alive. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The Tree of Life had extremely stringent living conditions. If players failed to meet these conditions, let alone getting the Tree of Life to develop, it wouldn't be strange if the tree died. Then, players would have to find more materials to resuscitate it. One of the main conditions to keep a Tree of Life alive was to plant it in a location with sufficiently dense mana. Originally, Shifeng had thought he could rely on Stone Forest City's environment to grow his Tree of Life. After all, even if he managed to revive his branch, it would only become a sapling. The amount of mana a sapling required wasn't as much as what a mature Tree of Life needed. In fact, with Stone Forest City's mana environment, he was confident he could grow even a legendary ranked sapling. However, for the fragmented divine artifact ranked sapling before him, he discovered that even one of the city's basic meditation rooms couldn't supply the sapling's mana requirements. It seems that if I don't upgrade Stone Forest City, I can't even touch this Tree of Life. Shifeng revealed a bitter smile as he looked at the sapling hovering before him. He then contacted Gentle Snow and asked, "Snow, how are things coming along on your side?" Chapter 2547, Foundations Ready, Reconstructing Stone Forest City. I already had my men make the necessary preparations. However, quite a few superpowers are selling the Western continent's materials right now, so we'll have to wait a while to get a better price. Gentle Snow answered upon hearing Shifeng's question. Although the Western continent's rare materials were very precious on the Eastern continent, there were still some superpowers that sold them. To get a better price for the materials Shifeng brought back and to avoid significant price fluctuations, they had to not only split the materials across numerous kingdoms and empires but also consider the timing and sell only the materials that were unavailable or in low supply. Only by doing so would they be able to get the best price for their materials. For the current Zero Wing, though, handling these matters wasn't a problem at all. "Stop waiting. Sell whatever you can right now," Shifeng said after giving the matter some thought. "So soon?" Gentle Snow was a little confused by Shifeng's decision. The price they could get from selling the materials quickly would be considerably different from what they would get if they sold the materials gradually. After all, not everybody had a use for the Western continent's rare materials. If they sold these materials in bulk, they would saturate the market very quickly, which would reduce their profits. "Mitchum, I'm in urgent need of money right now," Shifeng said, nodding. If possible, he would prefer not to act precipitately either. However, plans were always subject to change. He never thought that the Tree of Life's branch he obtained would really turn out to be a divine artifact, albeit a fragmented one. The density of the mana that a fragmented divine artifact ranked Tree of Life's sapling required was something even the basic meditation room, the place with the highest ambient mana in Stone Forest City, was incapable of supplying. A Tree of Life's sapling was different from other items. Once it formed, it could not be stored inside a bag for however long players wanted. Instead, it would live for just 2 or 3 days. If players failed to provide it with an adequate living environment, then it would wilt and revert into a branch. Moreover, ordinary bags couldn't store a Tree of Life sapling, as the sapling was a non-bag space item. Fortunately, Shifeng had the epic spatial bag, which was capable of storing non-bag space items. Otherwise, he would have no choice but to leave the sapling to die inside the basic meditation room. Meanwhile, in God's domain, there were only 3 methods to increase the mana density of a city. The first method was to build constructions that raised the density of mana. However, aside from the mana tower, players had to find the designs for other similar constructions on their own. Moreover, designs for constructions capable of raising a city's mana density by a significant margin were incomparably valuable, easily surpassing fragmented legendary items in value. Any power that obtained such a design would definitely choose to use it themselves instead of selling or trading it away. Zero Wing did not possess such a design at the moment, so this route was not viable. The second method was just as difficult to fulfill as the first method, and that was to install a better power source in the city's core magic array, which would raise the mana density inside the city. The third method was the one most used in the past, and that was to raise the rank of the city. When a city's rank increased, the standard of its core magic array would improve as well. As a result, the city's mana density would increase significantly. The promotion of a guild city required a sufficiently large player population and painstaking work. It wasn't something that could be achieved swiftly. However, it was also the easiest way to raise the mana density of a city. Currently, in terms of prosperity and security standards, Stone Forest City already met the requirements of an intermediate city. Its popularity was now the only thing holding back the city's promotion. Normally, the city would take a lot more time to accumulate the required popularity. However, there was a shortcut to raising a city's popularity: erecting advanced constructions. Building an advanced construction in a guild city would instantly grant the city a large amount of city popularity. In Stone Forest City's current state, the addition of just one advanced construction would be sufficient to elevate the city to the intermediate city standard. At that time, not only the city size but also the mana density inside the city would increase by a large margin. However, Shifeng currently did not possess an advanced construction design. All he had was the design for the Freedom Hotel, a peak construction. Although a peak construction would grant much more popularity than an advanced construction would upon completion, its construction cost was also a lot higher. Building a peak construction required not only extremely rare materials but also a lot of coins. Not to mention, the construction cost would differ, depending on the size of the peak construction. As far as Shifeng knew, the material costs aside, even the cheapest peak construction cost 1 million gold. Fortunately, all the materials necessary to construct the Freedom Hotel were already on hand. The only thing he lacked was funds. Currently, Zero Wing had less than 150,000 gold to spare. That was nowhere near the amount necessary. The only reliable way that Shifeng could think of to earn a large sum within 2 or 3 days was selling the Western continent's materials. I understand. I'll try to sell all the materials the various kingdoms and empires lack as soon as possible. If it's still not enough, I can also sell materials that are already available on the market, Gentle Snow said, nodding when she saw the serious look on Shifeng's face. I'll leave it to you then, Shifeng said before disconnecting the call. He then left the candlelight trading firm and personally conducted the preparation work necessary to construct the Freedom Hotel. As one of the few peak constructions available in God's domain, the Freedom Hotel was not easy to build. It required not only a large number of master architects but also a large number of master magicians. Without the technical expertise of a master magician, one shouldn't even think of constructing the Freedom Hotel. This was also the reason why Shifeng had not been in a hurry to construct the Freedom Hotel even after obtaining its design. Meanwhile, as Shifeng was gathering the necessary workforce to construct the Freedom Hotel, the various superpowers members, who were keeping an eye on Zero Wing's every action, were stupefied by this situation. What's Black Flame trying to do? The Dark World's invasion is about to start, yet instead of making preparations for battle, he's having a bunch of architects run around the city? Maybe he is going to construct additional defensive structures to reassure Stone Forest City's players? I heard that this incident more than halved Stone Forest City's profits. Once the Dark World's players invade, instead of generating profits, Stone Forest City might end up a money pit instead. If Black Flame knew something like this would happen, why did he provoke Demon's Heart in the first place? Does he think a few defensive structures will be enough to stop the Dark World's players? Let alone Zero Wing's Guild City, even a guild city operated by 5 superpowers wouldn't be able to stop all of the Dark World's players. The various superpowers secretly ridiculed Shifeng when they saw him running around the city busily. The Dark World's invasion was imminent, yet Shifeng was actually doing something as futile as constructing a few additional defensive structures instead of trying to recruit superpowers to help him repulse this invasion. In this situation, Zero Wing's members also could not help panicking. Previously, they had been very confident in Stone Forest City's defenses. After all, no power had ever managed to break through the city's defenses thus far. Now, however, their opponent was not a single power but an entire otherworld instead. No one knew whether Stone Forest City could hold its ground against such a force. Meanwhile, over in the Black Dragon Empire, Gentle Snow wore an ecstatic expression on her face as she oversaw the sales of materials. System: the Demon Heart Flower, 1 stack, you placed at the auction house has been sold. After deducting the procedural fees, 20 gold 27 silver have been deposited into your bag space. System: the magically refined iron 1 stack you placed at the auction house has been sold. After deducting the procedural fees, 55 gold 21 silver have been deposited into your bag space. System: the crimson timber you placed at the auction house has been sold. After deducting the procedural fees, 89 gold 76 silver have been deposited into your bag space. It had only been half an hour since she gave the sell order to her subordinates, and the materials they put up for auction were already being hotly contested. She had expected to gain only 400,000 gold from the first batch of materials they had prepared to sell. Now, despite having sold less than half of the first batch, they had already made over 350,000 gold. The demand for the materials far surpassed her projections. What Gentle Snow did not know was that, while superpowers were indeed selling the Western continent's materials, these superpowers were selling only a small portion of their stockpile. They had kept the majority for their own use. Meanwhile, these small amounts of materials might be useful for the individual player or adventurer team, but they were hardly of any use to a large guild, which would rather ignore them than waste time bidding over scraps. However, Gentle Snow was selling materials necessary for producing master potions and level 100+ weapons and equipment, and in impressive amounts. For the various large guilds that were desperately trying to explore level 100 neutral maps, these materials were a godsend. Hence, for a time, the various large guilds were crazily competing against each other over the materials Gentle Snow and her subordinates sold. And in less than half a day, they had sold half of their stockpile of materials, netting more than 4 million gold, nearly double their expected profits. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. This outcome astonished even Feng. It's no wonder those first-rate powers that were capable of intercontinental travel eventually developed into superpowers. This is simply a jackpot. Feng sighed ruefully when he received the 4.11 million gold from Gentle Snow's subordinate. In Feng's opinion, even selling the materials for 4 or 5 times their original price would already have been plenty exaggerated. After all, ordinary players couldn't afford the materials he brought back. Only the various major powers would have the means to purchase them. Now, however, he had earned more than 10 times the original cost of these materials. If he could make a few more business trips like this, he would most likely have enough money to drown an entire superpower to death. However, while Feng was indeed surprised by this outcome, he did not stop working. After making sure the area he stood on was sealed off from the public, he took out a thick, ancient tome from his bag. This tome was none other than the Freedom Hotel design. System: you now possess all the necessary construction materials and land to construct the Freedom Hotel. Do you wish to start its construction? Chapter 2548, Freedom Hotel's surprise appearance. Upon receiving the system notification, Feng took a deep breath and chose to construct the Freedom Hotel. Immediately afterward, he received another system notification. System: please choose the size of the Freedom Hotel you wish to build. A small one will cost 1,200,000 gold, a medium one will cost 1,500,000 gold, and a large one will cost 2 million gold. Sure enough, it really is expensive. Feng was flabbergasted when he saw the prices listed. Although he had known that peak constructions cost a ton to build, he still found it difficult to accept after seeing the prices with his own eyes. With 1.2 million gold, one could easily construct 2 or 3 guild cities. It was an astronomical amount of money, even for superpowers, enough to let a first-rate guild achieve rapid development. Now, however, this sum was necessary just to construct a small Freedom Hotel. It was no exaggeration to say that peak constructions were things that only the various superpowers could afford. Other powers would only be able to use the design as a decoration. Constructing the real thing would be beyond their means. After seeing these prices, Feng chose to construct a large Freedom Hotel without hesitation. Originally, he had planned to construct only a small Freedom Hotel for the sole purpose of upgrading Stone Forest City into an intermediate city. However, since he had gained a much larger harvest than he initially expected from selling the Western continent's rare materials, he naturally had no need to be stingy with his coins. After all, the difference between a small Freedom Hotel and a large Freedom Hotel was massive. Although both small and large Freedom Hotels possessed the same functions, a small Freedom Hotel had only 8 floors. In comparison, a large Freedom Hotel had a total of 32 floors. Starting out with a small Freedom Hotel and gradually upgrading it into a large Freedom Hotel would also be many times more expensive than constructing a large Freedom Hotel directly. Hence, in a situation where funds were plentiful, most powers would choose to construct a large Freedom Hotel from the get-go. As soon as Shi Feng chose to construct a large Freedom Hotel, 2 million gold disappeared from his bag space, the coins transforming into a streak of golden light that flowed into the Freedom Hotel design in his hands. In the next moment, construction magic arrays started appearing on the tome's numerous pages. Every one of these designs was extremely complex, and even the simplest one was an advanced magic array. If someone below the Master Magician standard were to look at these magic arrays, they would most likely have a huge headache. Fortunately, most of these magic arrays could be retrieved from the design and engraved on the finished construction directly. Otherwise, if Shi Feng had to do all the magic arrays required for the Freedom Hotel from scratch, he definitely wouldn't be able to manage, short of reaching the Grandmaster Magician standard. "Alright, everyone, start working," Shi Feng said after seeing the magic arrays appear on the design. In the next moment, over 100 architects sprang into action while holding a copy of the Freedom Hotel design. Some architects started refining materials, while some started fragmenting materials. The construction of the Freedom Hotel progressed smoothly under Shi Feng's direction. As for Shi Feng himself, he frantically engraved magic arrays on the finished portions of the Freedom Hotel. At the same time as Shi Feng was constructing the Freedom Hotel, inside a high-class restaurant in a border town of the Ten Saints Empire. Currently, not only was the restaurant fully booked, but several dozen Tier 3 peak experts also stood guard around it. The imposing aura these players exuded deterring passers-by from approaching the restaurant. Several people were seated inside the restaurant's top-floor room. If the upper echelons of the Ten Saints Empire's various superpowers were to see these people, they would definitely receive a fright. This was because every player inside this room was a big shot in God's domain. They were existences capable of shaking up entire kingdoms and empires with their decisions. Among those present, the person with the highest status would have to be Cold Shadow, a Vice Guild leader of mythology. Vice Guild Leader Light, how are the preparations on your side coming along? I heard that the Dark World's Dark Rhapsody and Deity Society have signed a non-interference agreement with Zero Wing, a level 108, white-clad, elderly man sporting Pantheon's guild emblem asked as he looked at the indifferent and handsome youth seated beside him. Our preparations are nearly complete. The Dark World side just needs a little more time. Elder South, please rest assured. Those two guilds might have great influence over the Dark World, but the number of experts they command are nothing when compared to the expert population of the entire Dark World. In addition, we have reached an agreement with World Domination, which will help us add fuel to the fire. At that time, so long as no power assists Zero Wing, Stone Forest City will fall quickly, the handsome youth named Flaming Light replied with a chuckle. You can also rest assured on this point, Vice Guild Leader Light. Starlink has already sent greetings to the various powers operating around Stone Forest City. They definitely will not assist Zero Wing in fending off the Dark World's experts, Lu Xinglua said, smiling. Originally, Lu Xinglua had been racking his brain over how to deal with Zero Wing, which was growing stronger by the day. However, Shi Feng had actually dared offend a hot potato like Demon's Heart. Since that was the case, Lu Xinglua naturally wouldn't mind sending Zero Wing on its way. An entire world filled with dark players. Even Lu Xinglua himself did not have the confidence to go up against such a force, yet Shi Feng had actually taken the initiative to challenge this force. Zero Wing's guild leader simply did not know the meaning of death. So long as Zero Wing lost the gold mine known as Stone Forest City, with Starlink's financial strength, stomping Zero Wing to death would be a piece of cake. When the time comes, I'll have to rely on everyone present. As for the distribution of Stone Forest City's shares that comes afterward, Demon's Heart will take no part in it. Moreover, I believe the Dark World's top 3 guilds also won't dare interfere in this matter. Everyone present will be free to decide what to do with Stone Forest City. I only hope that we can put a swift end to this affair. If Zero Wing focuses fully on defense, I'm afraid even our side will have trouble taking down Stone Forest City, Flaming Light said. You don't have to worry about this point, Cold Shadow said suddenly. I have already promised Stone Forest City's various adventurer teams that I will purchase their materials at a high price and also let them exchange for a limited number of combat runes. I believe Stone Forest City's adventurer teams will no longer sell their materials to Zero Wing. Without the materials of these adventurer teams, Zero Wing won't be able to sustain its daily operations. Once the Dark World's portal opens, Zero Wing won't even be able to gather materials on its own. In that case, Zero Wing will implode in a matter of days. Upon hearing Cold Shadow's words, everyone present could not help but gasp in shock at her ruthlessness. Combat runes were items unique to the Western continent and were something the Eastern continent's various powers had been dreaming of obtaining in order to raise the combat power of their members by a large margin. If an entire team were equipped with combat runes, it would have a much easier time raiding team dungeons and field bosses. Due to the effectiveness of the combat runes, the Eastern continent's various superpowers were sparing no expense to purchase them, with some going as far as using magic crystals for payment. Adventurer teams didn't even get a chance to purchase these combat runes. Now that Cold Shadow was offering to let Stone Forest City's adventurer teams exchange for some combat runes, those adventurer teams would definitely accept her offer without hesitation. With this, Zero Wing would truly have to fend off the Dark World's invasion by itself. Due to this matter, the members of Stone Forest City's adventurer teams were currently holding secret discussions. At the same time, they were also gathering materials to exchange for Mythology's combat runes. They were not selling any of the materials they harvested from Cold Spring Forest to Zero Wing at all. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Zero Wing really knows how to hold its breath. Our adventurer teams have clearly stopped supplying it with materials, yet instead of raising its purchasing price, it is actually constructing something new. Does Zero Wing really think it can survive the Dark World's invasion with just a few additional defensive structures? Maybe Zero Wing is trying to make a quick buck before it falls. After all, so long as the Dark World's portal opens, everything will be over. As the adventurer team players looked at the magic array enveloping the Freedom Hotel, which was under construction, they could not help speculating about it among themselves. So what if Zero Wing's black flame was strong? It was useless even if he had the strength to go up against a superpower single-handedly. After all, before an entire world's players, even super guilds would be powerless. Meanwhile, as Stone Forest City's players were quietly discussing among themselves, the magic array concealing the Freedom Hotel suddenly shattered. With the magic array's disappearance, a 32-story building on Stone Forest City's main street came into view. At 150 meters tall, it overlooked the entire city. Chapter 2549, Promotion to Intermediate City. What a huge building! What's going on? Can a basic city have such a tall construction? Players on the main street were stunned when the Freedom Hotel was suddenly revealed. Previously, the tallest building in Stone Forest City had only been 100 meters tall, but not only did the Freedom Hotel reach another 50 meters above that, but it also occupied a shockingly large area. It easily covered the area of a large-scale sports stadium. Such incredible buildings were even rare in NPC cities, let alone guild cities. The Freedom Hotel's sheer size stunned everyone who saw it. While nearby players discussed this new construction, the Zero Wing members responsible for building the Freedom Hotel were astonished by their own creation. They had known that they had been building an extraordinary superstructure, but they hadn't understood how amazing it truly was until after the Freedom Hotel's completion. Outsiders had no idea how impressive the hotel really was, but they, who had built it, were perfectly aware. The Freedom Hotel was like another world. It was bigger on the inside than it appeared, and the mana density within was frighteningly high. The Freedom Hotel's mana was around 2 or 3 times denser than in the outside world. Not even Candlelight's basic meditation rooms could compare. Moreover, that had been before the Freedom Hotel had been complete. There was a major difference between complete and incomplete structures in God's domain. A construction in the game functioned like one massive magic array. It wouldn't be complete until the final magic array had been engraved, unable to function. The building would only exhibit its full potential once that task had been accomplished. In other words, the Mana Density Zero Wings members had felt inside the Freedom Hotel had been a result of the rare materials they had used. It hadn't been amplified by any magic arrays. That wasn't the only thing that amazed Zero Wings architects. None of them had realized the complete building would stand 150 meters tall. Stone Forest City was surrounded by the Cold Spring Forest, and during their meeting on the 27th floor, they had been mesmerized by the view. If they had an opportunity to stay a night on the Freedom Hotel's top floor, they'd jump at the chance, regardless of the price. Players would also rapidly earn the double EXP buff while in the hotel due to the high mana density. Staying in the hotel would substantially boost their leveling speed. After all, every player grinding in level 100 neutral maps had to return to a city to rest sooner or later, and if players could earn the double EXP buff while resting, their leveling speed would be greatly affected. While Zero Wings architects were in awe of the Freedom Hotel's future prospects, Sherfeng looked at the peak construction and sighed ruefully. He had only witnessed superpowers Freedom Hotels during his previous life, yet now, Zero Wing had one of its own. Peak constructions weren't just rare in God's domain. Their powerful abilities were the true reason that drove countless powers crazy. Before Sherfeng could call up the hotel's system interface and inspect it properly, however, he heard the sounds of a series of system notifications. System: the large Freedom Hotel is complete. All players involved in the construction receive level +1 and 8,000 free lifestyle proficiency points. System: the large Freedom Hotel is complete. Stone Forest City's popularity increased by 100,000 points, city prosperity level +1, and Stone Forest City's popularity accumulation speed increased by 10%. System: congratulations. Stone Forest City is the first guild city to own a peak construction. Rewarding Freedom City title. This title will encourage more NPCs to visit Stone Forest City. System: Stone Forest City has met the qualifications for its promotion into an intermediate city. Do you wish to promote it to an intermediate city? By the time the system notifications ended, Sherfeng had risen from level 111 to level 112, saving several days of grinding. The abundant rewards even surprised him. I got the Freedom City title, just like that? Sherfeng stared at the system notifications, at a loss for words. Obtaining titles in God's domain was relatively easy, but the same couldn't be said for towns and cities. Every power with a guild city dreamed of obtaining the Freedom City title. In particular, not only would more human NPCs visit a city with the title, but other races' NPCs would also make their way to the city, especially NPC merchants and soldiers. The title would allow Stone Forest City to recruit more human NPC soldiers and those of other races. Of all the races in God's domain, humans weren't particularly talented. They neither had impressive physiques and an affinity for the earth as giants did, nor did they have the magical gifts or keen senses of the elves and Ors, respectively. To put it simply, humans didn't have any outstanding advantages. Their legacies and relentless research were the only reasons that humans were able to occupy a significant portion of the main continent. There was also the fact that there were more humans than other races. In terms of combat power, human NPCs were far inferior to giants, elves, and Ors. Sherfeng didn't give the matter much thought, however. The Freedom City title might be a major boon, but it wouldn't be immediately effective. More importantly, Stone Forest City was ready for its promotion. An intermediate city. Current powers might not yet realize how important an intermediate city was. They only saw it as a larger city, able to accommodate more players. At best, it could rival NPC cities. However, the various powers weren't aware that guild cities were not like their NPC counterparts. The two didn't even fall into the same category. Basic guild cities only had the shape of a city, but they'd become true cities once they reached intermediate rank. This was why Sherfeng had wanted to upgrade his city before transferring it to a level 100 neutral map. The city's defensive system would only truly activate once it became an intermediate city, and only then would a guild city have the foundation to survive in such a high-level area. Naturally, Sherfeng didn't hesitate to promote Stone Forest City. System: Stone Forest City is located in Cold Spring Forest, a level 100 neutral map. Promoting it into an intermediate city will cost 500,000 gold and 100,000 magic crystals. Do you wish to proceed? Promote. Sherfeng confirmed. The gold and magic crystals instantly vanished from Sherfeng's bag, and a gigantic magic barrier enveloped Stone Forest City before all players were teleported outside of its walls. What's going on? Why was I suddenly teleported outside? What's happening to Stone Forest City? Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The players looked up at the magic barrier around the city in stunned confusion. They had no idea what was happening. After a moment, however, some guild players' expressions shifted to shock. Is Zero Wing relocating Stone Forest City again? No, I've seen some guild towns promotions before. This magic barrier looks similar. I think Zero Wing is promoting the city. What? Are you serious? Stone Forest City is being promoted? Chapter 2550 Stone Forest City? Stone Forest City's being promoted? When they heard someone mention Stone Forest City's promotion, the crowd, which had been forcefully teleported out of the city, fell silent as everyone stared at the magic barrier in astonishment. Guild towns promotions had already become a common sight, but not a single guild had upgraded its city to intermediate rank. The promotion requirements were just too high, and fulfilling them required a long time. And yet, when the various superpowers only had a few basic guild cities under their control, and none were in level 100 neutral maps, Zero Wing was promoting Stone Forest City. Stone Forest City has actually met the promotion requirements? Zero Wing really lucked out. With an intermediate city's defenses, even the Dark World's players will have a hard time taking it down. You're not seeing the big picture. Stone Forest City has merely become an intermediate city, it isn't a main city. How much stronger could its defenses have possibly become? Not even an advanced NPC city is guaranteed to hold its ground against all the players in an otherworld, much less an intermediate guild city. That's right. As long as those players capture Stone Forest City, Zero Wing will regret promoting its city even more. Although everyone was surprised by Stone Forest City's promotion to intermediate rank, they didn't think it was good news for Zero Wing. The Dark World still posed a threat. The news quickly reached the various superpowers' upper echelons. They fell into heated discussions about the situation. Ten Saints Empire, Crimson Emperor's residence, upper echelons lounge. And here I thought Zero Wing would do something outstanding. So, its trump card turns out to be an intermediate city. A fierce man in the lounge disdainfully commented as he read the latest report on Stone Forest City. He had already reached level 108 and radiated a lethal aura. The man turned his gaze on the woman in white resting nearby and continued, "Illusory, it seems your gamble won't pay off. Does Zero Wing truly think an intermediate city can stop the Dark World's forces and various superpowers' joint assault? The Grand Elders aren't pleased with you after your strong objections to partnering with Demon's Heart. If Zero Wing can't even survive in Cold Spring Forest, not only will you lose your position as Vice Guild Leader, but they might also stick you with the reserves forever. I merely offered a suggestion. Wasn't the Guild Leader responsible for the final decision?" Illusory words shot back, rolling her eyes. Earnestly, she continued, "I still can't shake the feeling that Zero Wing won't go down so easily. This is just like the shock I felt when Black Flame and his team actually broke into Demon City. Besides, even if Crimson Emperor doesn't participate in the assault, we have nothing to lose, right? We might not lose anything, but dark players will rule God's domain in the future. Demon's Heart's development speed is astounding. Based on our reports, Demon's Heart has secretly allied with several powers that are just as strong as super guilds. If we form a beneficial relationship with Demon's Heart, developing in level 100 neutral maps will be much easier in the future, the fierce man prudently countered. If we participate in Demon's Heart's plan, Crimson Emperor can befriend the Dark Guild and secure a share of Stone Forest City's benefits. The Grand Elders are likely cursing you for the suggestion right about now. This should have been a chance for Crimson Emperor to profit, but that chance is gone. They'll definitely make you pay for it. Don't blame me for this. There's no harm in being careful. The guild leader likely agreed to my suggestion, thinking the same. God's domain is too unstable right now, and the atmosphere among the various superpowers is growing tenser. Once the Dark World connects to the main continent, we'll reach a tipping point. I wouldn't even be surprised if we see superpowers fall, Illusory Words said, smiling bitterly. Initially, she hadn't wanted to dissuade her guild from allying with Demon's Heart and attacking Zero Wing with the other superpowers. She actually agreed that Zero Wing was doomed this time. However, when she recalled Shifeng's performance in Demon City and his mythical display in the Dark Den, she hadn't been able to keep silent against partnering with Demon's Heart. Others might think her suggestion had been ludicrous, but only those who had personally experienced the shock of watching Shifeng single-handedly stop a Tier 5 Demon King's attack would understand how frighteningly powerful the swordsman was. You'll have to explain yourself to the Grand Elders. They just instructed me to visit Stone Forest City with our main force. If Zero Wing's position is lacking, we'll cooperate with the other superpowers, the fierce man said, shrugging helplessly. They're acting already? Illusory Words was a little surprised. Is Demon's Heart on the move? They had only received news of Stone Forest City's promotion a few minutes ago, yet the guild's Grand Elders had already decided to abandon Zero Wing if the situation turned south. Not even the guild leader had opposed the decision. The guild leader and Grand Elders must have received some shocking news about Demon's Heart to drive them to act. They never would have changed their minds so quickly otherwise. I suspect that's the case, the fierce man said before standing up. He then asked, "Do you want to come with us?" Yes. Illusory Words nodded. If I don't, the Grand Elders will likely view my suggestion as even less reliable. Following which, the fierce man and Illusory Words made their way towards Stone Forest City with Crimson Emperor's main force members. 2 hours after players had been forced out of Stone Forest City, the barrier around it began to crack. Within seconds, it shattered and vanished, revealing a completely new guild city. When the players resting in the nearby forest saw the new city, they were utterly dumbfounded. Stone Forest City's walls had undergone a heaven-defying transformation. Originally, the city walls had only been around a dozen meters tall, but now, they were more than 30 meters. The walls had also been rebuilt with completely different materials. It looked like an iron beast had curled itself around the city. Moreover, magic runes covered the entire length of the walls, giving them a strangely heavy feeling. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The city's buildings had also changed significantly. Not only were all of the city's constructions much larger than before, but they also radiated an indescribable pressure. Even from over 1,000 meters away, players felt as if something or someone had locked onto their auras. Even more shocking was the mana Stone Forest City radiated. Players had already been amazed by the mana density in Stone Forest City. It was no exaggeration to claim that no other guild city in God's domain was its match in this regard, but now, Stone Forest City's mana density had reached newfound highs. There was even a faint white mist enveloping everything within the city's walls. Crap, is that really Stone Forest City? Did Zero Wing replace Stone Forest City with some other city? Chapter 2551, Intermediate Cities Effects. The crowd began to converse as they stared at the transformed Stone Forest City. However, Zero Wing's members were more shocked than anyone. The moment the seal on the city had lifted, Zero Wing's members had been allowed back in. As they entered the city, they were mesmerized. Aside from the city's mana density, which players could feel from outside of it, These players were stunned by the city's new infrastructure. Not only did the buildings look completely different, but quite a few were now shops, run by non-human NPCs. These shops sold special magic scrolls, potions, food, and drinks that were usually very scarce on the market. Most importantly, Stone Forest City now had NPC trading firm shops. These new shops might look like the ones ordinary NPCs owned, but NPC trading firms often issued quests for players. Once players had earned enough reputation points with a particular NPC trading firm, they could receive special, high-ranked quests that offered bountiful rewards, and if they were lucky, they could even obtain high-quality weapons and equipment by completing these quests. These NPC trading firms were one of the main reasons that even now, independent and guild players frequently visited NPC cities. Now that Stone Forest City had some of these trading firms' shops as well, they could continue to earn reputation points and pick up quests, saving them the trouble of returning to an NPC city. What did you do, guild leader? Is this really Stone Forest City? Gentle Snow asked, her heart pounding as she gazed around the main street. Stone Forest City now had just as many high-rise buildings and advanced shops as White River City. Truthfully, she would have assumed that she had entered a major NPC city, if not for the eye-catching Freedom Hotel. The biggest difference between NPC and guild cities was the presence of these NPC trading firms. They were responsible for nearly half of the quests available in NPC cities. These quests granted abundant EXP, but they also offered high monetary rewards. Even for expert players, these quests were a main source of income. This was why players were still tied to NPC cities. If they ignored these quests, they'd lose half of their income, and that would make it difficult for ordinary players to survive in God's domain. The chances of acquiring rare materials and equipment in level 100 maps were incredibly low, after all. At this point, ordinary players only grinded for EXP in level 100 maps. They didn't rely on these areas as a stable source of income. Now that Stone Forest City was home to so many NPC trading firms' advanced shops, the resident players wouldn't have to return to an NPC city to pick up or turn in the trading firm's quests. They could simply do so in Stone Forest City. This additional feature would only be a minor convenience for ordinary players, but for the various powers, this would allow them to shake off the shackles that bound them to NPC cities. If other powers had this feature in their guild cities, they would be able to thrive independently even without the help of NPC cities. They could develop wherever they wished. Of course, this is Stone Forest City. Once a guild city reaches intermediate rank, it gains the ability to survive independently in the fields, Shurfeng said, smiling at Gentle Snow's ecstatic expression. There might only be one rank between a basic city and an intermediate city, but it was like the difference between heaven and earth. This was why he had been so eager to upgrade Stone Forest City to intermediate rank. As an intermediate city, Stone Forest City could thrive perfectly well, even if Zero Wing lost Starmoon Kingdom. At this stage of the game, the competition in NPC cities had grown intense, and they were no longer under player control. As a result, managing NPC cities had become incredibly troublesome, and there was a risk of other powers taking over. In contrast, players had full control over guild cities. If other powers wanted to take one over, they'd have to capture it. However, Shurfeng considered the Freedom Hotel's completion as far more important than Stone Forest City's promotion. The hotel would be the key that would lead a guild city to prosperity. Not only was the Freedom Hotel's mana incredibly dense, but players could also set up teleportation arrays within. Unlike NPC cities, there were no return scrolls for guild cities, and gaining them was a major challenge. Freedom Hotels, however, could meet that challenge. Any of the Freedom Hotel's guests could purchase return scrolls and teleport to it at any time and from anywhere. This feature was immensely convenient for players that didn't have a residence or house within the city. Aside from the convenience it offered combat players, the Freedom Hotel would be significantly helpful to lifestyle players. Not only would players accumulate the double EXP buff when resting in the hotel, but they would also earn the double lifestyle proficiency buff. Unfortunately, they couldn't accumulate the proficiency buff quite as fast as the double EXP, but it was a precious bonus to lifestyle players. Tools and potions that increased one's lifestyle proficiency acquisition rate were still insanely expensive on the market, far out of ordinary players' budgets. Guild leader, our members are in place. Should we open Stone Forest City now? Gentle Snow reported once she had calmed down. To cope with the Dark World's invasion, they had dispatched a large fraction of the guild's manpower to Stone Forest City. Even though the city was now much larger, they could still manage it without issues. Moreover, Gentle Snow was eager to show the city off to the public. Once Stone Forest City reopened, independent experts would likely have a hard time sitting still. They might even decide to join Zero Wing after discovering the city's changes. Zero Wing was now the only guild to break free from NPC kingdoms and empires, and with the city's help, the guild's members could level up far faster than other players. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Ooh, let's wait. We can open the city once I'm done with the Freedom Hotel, Shifeng said. The Freedom Hotel? Gentle Snow was a little confused. The hotel had already been constructed. What more needed to be done? Shifeng didn't explain, however, and instructed her to refine Stone Forest City's management and entrance fee collection. He then headed to the nearby Freedom Hotel. Once he stood in the hotel's inner courtyard, which he had built personally, Shifeng retrieved the ancient Tree of Life's sapling from his bag. The mana density here should be the highest within the city. If not even this is enough, I'll be out of options. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.